Rhaegar Targaryen first glimpsed the sun glinting upon Robert Baratheon's warhammer across the blood-streaked waters of the Trident. Through the din of roaring men and dying horses, he heard the faint, thrumming echo of his heart, as if some cosmic harpist plucked a single trembling string deep within his soul. This was the moment the singers would make immortal, or so he believed. This was the moment that would decide everything. After so much turmoil, his father's madness, his own guilt, his yearning for something better, he felt a shocking lucidity in that instant, a sense of final, crystalline purpose. He urged his destrier forward through the crush of bodies. They parted under the onslaught of Valyrian steel. His sword was still unchipped, his strength not yet flagged. His silvered armor, the rubies on his breastplate shimmering like droplets of fresh blood, caught the dying sun and flung its light back across the battlefield. In that glare, soldiers blinked, uncertain, momentarily dazzled. They saw the crown prince and they knew him at once, for there was no more resplendent figure in the realm. Some turned back, some leaped forward, but Rhaegar kept his focus only on the enormous man crashing toward him in a swirl of battered steel and broad shoulders. Robert's stentorian cry tore above the fray, for House Baratheon, for the Stormlands, for Lyanna. Rhaegar's horse snorted and reared as the two armies parted around them in a ring of churned mud and red water, as though the gods themselves demanded a clean arena for their champions. Even the thunder of steel on steel seemed to dull. Rhaegar's mind cleared of all thought except the memory of a slender girl in a crown of blue winter roses. He inhaled the copper tang of blood on the battlefield and remembered the swirl of snow in that secret place beneath the white canopy of trees. He remembered the hushed vow he had spoken, the vow that had driven him to challenge not just Robert but half the lords of Westeros. He remembered the prophecy that haunted him since his youth, the faint music of destiny that forever whispered in his dreams. A single moment to decide the fate of kingdoms. Rhaegar braced, the reins taut in his left hand, his right hand lifting the sword whose hilt had been kissed by the prayers of his mother and polished by the tears of his sister. Across the scarlet tide, Robert roared, hefting his warhammer. Despite the fury of the rebel lords, that warhammer had already claimed countless Targaryen loyalists. That monstrous weapon had shattered shields and crushed chests. Rhaegar knew its danger, but he also knew that prophecy demanded he stand firm. In a solitary breath they charged. The crash was a conflagration of metal meeting metal. Rhaegar's sword caught the first downswing, and for a heartbeat he felt sure his arm would be torn from its socket by the sheer brute force of Robert's blow. He twisted in the saddle, narrowly avoiding a second vicious strike aimed at his chest. The warhammer connected with the lower rim of his breastplate, denting metal, driving the air from his lungs. The courtyard of watchers expanded and contracted like a beating heart, every soldier enthralled by the lethal dance of the two men. Rhaegar was the more graceful, but Robert possessed a physical might unlike any other man Rhaegar had faced. He grimaced against the pain, using his horse's momentum to keep Robert from landing a finishing blow. With a quick pivot, he maneuvered behind Robert's broad flank and slashed at the man's side, but the blow struck the steel of Robert's breastplate and glanced away harmlessly. Robert barked a laugh, pivoting with unnatural speed for such a massive figure. The warhammer arced again. This time, Rhaegar aligned his blade and intercepted it close to the haft, where he could leverage greater control. The clang shook the bones of his arms. Sparks danced before his vision. With a grunt, Rhaegar kicked out, catching Robert's leg. Robert staggered backward in the stirring mud, but did not fall. Their horses squealed, buffeted by the swirling energies of their master's duel. Rhaegar felt his heart pound again in that thrumming way, like the distant chord that belonged to a half-remembered song. He slid sideways off his saddle, spooking his charger so it careened away from them. The ring of onlookers widened, giving them each space to wield their weapons. Robert hopped off his own mount with a splash, muddy water streaking up his greaves. They stood at the shallow edge of the river, breathing hard, reading each other's intention in that warrior's hush. Rhaegar saw a flash in Robert's eyes, raw hatred, raw heartbreak. "You took her," Robert spat, voice ragged. "You took the woman I was to marry. You Targaryens think you own everything you set eyes upon." Rhaegar's chest heaved. He tried not to let the words cut him deeper than the blows had. "I loved her," he began. He did not finish the sentence, for the warhammer rose again, unstoppable as a comet. In the swirl of water around his ankles, Rhaegar stepped aside, letting the blow crash into the rushing river. The force alone sent a shockwave that trembled along his calves. He shifted behind Robert's right flank and lunged, burying the tip of his sword into the man's side, just under the arm. The strike was not deep. Robert jerked away, eyes flaring with anger, but it opened a seam in his armor, drawing blood. The two circled. Rhaegar's mind flickered with half-formed prayers. He hoped for no more death, but one must triumph. He recalled the shrieks of thousands, the banners torn by wind and scalded by flame, the storms raging in the stormlands, the hungry crows hovering overhead as if sensing an imminent feast. There was no more room for doubt, no more second chances. If Robert won, the dynasty Rhaegar had been born to uphold would dissolve in blood and betrayal. The Targaryen name, once so glorious, would be defiled by the madness of his father. If Rhaegar lost, Lyanna would forever be called a captive rather than a beloved. His children with Elia would be branded usurpers or beggars driven into the far corners of the earth if they even survived. Prophecy, fate, love, duty, all culminated here. Robert swung the hammer from right to left, a blow so swift Rhaegar barely parried. The impact hammered his ribs, but he maintained his footing, sliding left to carve a shallow cut across Robert's bicep. The big man hissed in pain. Then Robert's gauntlet fist connected with Rhaegar's jaw in a punishing hook. A bone-deep ache thundered along Rhaegar's skull. For a heartbeat, the world swam. He nearly collapsed. As he staggered, water rising around his ankles, Robert pounced in for the kill. The warhammer lifted overhead, a final blow that would drive Rhaegar into the stony bed of the Trident. Rhaegar knew what would happen if he did not move. His helm would crumple, his spine would snap, and House Targaryen, already precarious, would fade into ruin. But the chord in his heart thrummed again. In that instant, he raised his sword in a desperation parry, stepping inward to meet Robert's downward swing. Their eyes locked, 1 second, 2 seconds, then Robert's warhammer cracked, torn near the head by the perfect angle of Valyrian steel. The hammer's heavy metal chunk flew free, spinning off into the shallows with a tremendous splash. Robert's face went pale, as though witnessing the impossible. Disarmed, he lunged with his empty right hand for Rhaegar's throat, but the prince moved with fluid grace and drove the point of his sword into Robert's chest. The rebel stumbled, sinking into the water and mud, the steel shaft at an awkward angle. Rhaegar withdrew the blade with a gasp. Blood streamed from the breach in Robert's armor, blossoming across his tabard like a storm-tossed flower. In the hush that followed, the watchers all seemed to hold their breath. The swirl of the trident flowed around them, carrying away bits of debris. Rhaegar gazed down at Robert's eyes, seeing defiance slowly replaced by shock. Robert's lips parted as though he might speak her name once more, but all that emerged was a strangled rattle. Then Robert Baratheon, would-be usurper, collapsed into the shallows, water already lapping at his cheeks. Around them, the lines of rebels and royalists stared in wordless awe. Then the Targaryen loyalists roared with triumph, brandishing swords and banners. A wave of chaotic fighting erupted anew as the rebels, seeing their champion fall, lost coherence. Some fled, some knelt, but the victory was won. And Rhaegar, still stunned, lifted his sword, letting the rubies in his breastplate catch the dying sunlight. At that moment, as the last glow of day flared across his armor, it seemed to the watchers that Rhaegar Targaryen burned with a holy fire. The ring of watchers knelt or fell back. Rhaegar swayed but remained on his feet. Exhaustion slammed into him like a tidal wave. He had trained for this for so long, but even training could not prepare one for the emotional weight of that single deciding blow. He wiped the blood from his mouth, tasting salt and iron. Vaguely, he was aware of shouts as men called for the retreat of the rebels, of Dorne's spearmen cheering, of the King's Guard forcing the battered foe to surrender. He managed to straighten, searching for his white-cloaked protectors. Ser Barristan Selmy rushed through the shallows, pale hair plastered with sweat, face etched with relief. "Your Grace," he said in an unsteady voice, though Rhaegar was not yet king. "We must see you tended." Rhaegar allowed himself to be led away. His father was still in King's Landing, unless Aerys had decided to flee or commit some atrocity. The war was not fully ended by Robert's death. The realm's discontent was deeper than one man's ambition. Ned Stark still commanded rebel forces. Stannis Baratheon still held Storm's End. But the rebellious momentum had shattered with Robert's fall, and Rhaegar knew that he had the best chance now to unify the realm under a better, kinder Targaryen rule, if only he could wrest power from the Mad King. As the sun sank beneath the horizon, Rhaegar closed his eyes and felt a mixture of fear and exultation. His victory might end the bloodshed, or it might only herald a new struggle. Yet in his heart, something soared. He had lived. He had triumphed in the name of love and prophecy. Now he would see if destiny was truly on his side. In the days that followed, ravens flew from the battlefield. Word spread swiftly, Crown Prince Rhaegar had slain Robert Baratheon in single combat at the Trident. Most lords, weary of war and uncertain whether they wished to stand against a prince who had personally beaten the rebels' greatest champion, began to send messages of fealty. Some, like the Lord of the Crossing, Walder Frey, wasted no time in claiming they had always been loyal. Others, like the Lords of the Vale under Jon Arryn, were more reticent. But the greatest question remained, what of Eddard Stark of Winterfell? Rumor said Eddard Stark still had not recovered his sister Lyanna, still held by the prince somewhere in secret. Would Lord Stark bend the knee or pursue vengeance, continuing the war in Robert's name? Within a fortnight of the battle, Rhaegar found himself riding south again. Not to King's Landing but to a secret tower in the mountains of Dorne, where Lyanna waited. He traveled with only a handful of his most trusted companions. Ser Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, was among them, as was Prince Lewin Martell of the Kingsguard, both loyal to House Targaryen through and through. In the hush of a moonlit night, Rhaegar approached the tower that the Dornish smallfolk called the Tower of Joy. He remembered a time when the entire realm seemed to glow with promise. The Harrenhal tourney, the moment he bestowed the crown of winter roses upon Lyanna. How it caused an uproar among the gathered lords and ladies. They had whispered that the prince had insulted his wife, the Princess Elia of Dorne, with this act. They had whispered that Rhaegar was bewitched by a northern beauty. The truth was simpler and more devastating. He had recognized in Lyanna the missing piece of a prophecy, the spark that could reignite the Targaryen soul. Through nights of reading musty tomes, Rhaegar had come to believe he was the prince that was promised, the warrior of light. And though Elia had given him 2 children, Rhaegar was haunted by the notion that there must be a 3rd child to fulfill the ancient prophecy. He dismounted at the tower's base, heart-hammering. 2 white-cloaked Kingsguards stood guard, Ser Oswell Went and Lord Commander Gerald Hightower. They inclined their heads. No words were exchanged. Rhaegar hurried up the winding stair. He found Lyanna within, feverish and pale, her long brown hair tangled across the pillows. When he took her hand, she stirred, whispering his name. A midwife hovered anxiously nearby. In the flickering light of a single candle, Lyanna's gray eyes found him. He saw love and fear there, all at once. "Rhaegar," she murmured, barely audible. "Please promise me." He knelt beside her, pressing her hand to his cheek. She was burning up. "Yes," he said. "Anything, my love." "There's blood," her voice trembled. "I'm so cold." He glanced at the midwife, whose face looked grim. Lyanna had borne a child, a boy, only hours before Rhaegar's arrival, but the birth had been difficult. Rhaegar could see the infant swaddled in a corner, alive, though quiet, as if sensing the gravity. Lyanna's condition was dire. Rhaegar felt tears rise in his eyes. "You must hold on," he said urgently, voice cracking. "We need you. The realm needs you. I need you." She lifted a trembling hand to his face. "I can't, you must keep him safe. He's ours. Our son. Promise me you'll protect him from all that comes." Rhaegar swallowed the ache in his throat. "I will." She tried to speak again, but only a ragged gasp emerged. Rhaegar pressed his ear closer. "His name," she breathed. "We will give him," she winced, eyes rolling up. "Lyanna," he cried, gripping her hand, terror surging in his chest. The midwife rushed forward, examining the new mother, giving instructions for warm blankets, for potions. But the color was fading from Lyanna's lips. "No, no, no," Rhaegar whispered, as if by repetition he could banish death. She fought for breath, chest hitching. Finally, she exhaled in a shudder. Her last words were so faint that Rhaegar never fully deciphered them, but he believed he caught the name Jaehaerys, or perhaps Aemon. It sounded like a prayer. Then her eyes closed, her grip went slack, and the Tower of Joy was silent, save for Rhaegar's ragged breaths and the mewling cry of a newborn. Rhaegar felt the world tilt. All the triumph at the Trident, all the power he might seize as the next king, turned to ash in that moment. Lyanna Stark died in his arms, leaving him a son he must protect and a prophecy he had believed in so fiercely. He drew her to him, tears slipping down his cheeks and into her dark hair, murmuring endearments until the midwife gently took her from his arms to prepare her body. In time he stood, numb, and went to the corner to cradle the child. The baby was small, dark-haired like Lyanna, but with a certain Targaryen cast to his features. Rhaegar carried him to the window which overlooked the stony Dornish wilderness. "You will be the song of ice and fire," he whispered, voice hollow with grief. "You will be my legacy and hers. I name you Aemon Targaryen after the noblest men of our line. Or Jaehaerys, if that is what she meant." He paused. Perhaps you shall bear many names in your life, but you are mine, and I will keep you safe." Tears dropped onto the baby's wrappings, but Rhaegar vowed to himself that from this moment onward he would guide the realm into a new age, in memory of Lyanna, for the sake of their child, to break the cycle of madness that had consumed his father. Whether or not he truly was the prince that was promised, he would strive to be a king the realm deserved. Word spread quickly that Lyanna Stark had died giving birth to Rhaegar Targaryen's child. Whispers abounded as to whether the child was legitimate, a Targaryen by marriage or by abduction. The realm was riven by rumor. Lords across Westeros remained uncertain how to respond. Meanwhile, Rhaegar marched his loyalists to King's Landing, determined to confront his father. He traveled slowly, ensuring that food supplies were distributed to the villages ravaged by the rebellion, careful to limit any looting or pillaging among his men. He wanted to show the realm that a gentler Targaryen was coming to power. At Maidenpool, Rhaegar paused in his journey to gather news. Lords from the Crownlands arrived to pay homage, though many did so hesitantly, not knowing whether the Mad King might punish them for it. Rhaegar, for his part, had not spoken to his father since leaving the capital months earlier. He knew Aerys's unpredictability. The king had threatened to burn the city if the rebels drew too close, had already ignited pockets of wildfire in the depths of King's Landing to punish suspected traitors. Rhaegar dreaded what he might find upon returning. Ser Barristan Selmy urged caution. "Your father may see your approach as a threat, my prince. He may believe you mean to depose him." Arthur Dane, usually stoic, added softly, "Is that not what you intend?" Rhaegar stared into the distance, his eyes distant as if replaying nightmares. "I intend to save the realm," he said at last. "If he will not relinquish the throne peacefully, I must do what must be done. But let there be no more bloodshed than necessary." The men bowed their heads. Ser Barristan, loyal to the office of king but also well aware of Aerys's madness, placed a hand on Rhaegar's shoulder. "We will follow you, my prince, to the end. Let us hope the end is gentler than we fear." They advanced under black and red banners, a broad stream of men whose armor glinted in the sunlight. The city's gates were shut tight, but as Rhaegar's force approached, they saw no defenders upon the battlements. Only terrified faces, peering down. The gates swung open slowly, as if coaxed by an unseen hand. Rhaegar, wearing simpler armor now, he had foregone the ruby-studded breastplate of the Trident, led his vanguard inside. The streets were unnaturally silent. Windows were shuttered, and occasionally a wailing cry echoed from within narrow alleyways. The stench of fear and burnt flesh hung in the air. In the distance, the Red Keep loomed, the seat of Targaryen power. Rhaegar clenched the reins of his horse, recalling childhood days racing through the castle corridors, unaware of the darkness festering in his father's mind. He did not see any Lannister banners. Tywin Lannister's intentions remained uncertain. The old lion had stood aloof thus far, biding his time. At the gate of the Red Keep, Rhaegar dismounted. His men fanned out. Trumpets rang to announce his arrival, but no voice responded from within. The courtyard lay deserted, though a few bodies were scattered in corners, servants, perhaps, or lesser knights, their throats slit, as if in some final, frenzied purge. Rhaegar's pulse quickened. He drew his sword. He entered the keep with Barristan and Arthur at his side. The halls were dark, lit by guttering torches. Echoes flitted like ghosts. They stepped over more bodies as they ascended toward the throne room, a path of silent carnage. At last, they pushed open the door to the throne room itself, only to find it nearly empty. The light of day streamed through the narrow windows, illuminating the Iron Throne, a hulking mass of twisted, melted swords. And upon it, slouched like a wraith, was Aerys II Targaryen. His once silver hair was lank and tangled, the crown askew on his head. He wore a robe stained with old food and flecked with blood. His eyes, once so bright, were rimmed with madness. A single Kingsguard knight, Ser Jaime Lannister, stood at the base of the throne steps, expression taut with tension. Jaime's golden hair caught the light, and he looked up at Rhaegar with a complex gaze, relief, trepidation, guilt. Rhaegar strode forward, sword at the ready. In that moment, Aerys stirred, letting out a hacking laugh. "So you've come at last," he croaked. "My own son, come to betray me. I saw it in the flames. You are no true dragon, boy. I am the king, I am the dragon." The stench of wildfire and rot choked the air. Rhaegar forced himself to meet his father's eyes. The man who sired him was gone. Only madness remained. "Father," Rhaegar said quietly, "the realm is in ruin. You must stand down. Let me care for you, so no more innocents die." Aerys spat. a thick blob of saliva landing on the stone floor. Care for me? Do you think I don't know your plan? You want the throne. You want to murder me as you murdered your mother. She died giving birth to you. A curse upon the day. Aerys's voice built to a shriek. He turned to Jaime. Why do you stand there, Kingslayer? Kill him. Kill my treacherous son. Jaime glanced from Aerys to Rhaegar, lips parted in silent dread. Barristan and Arthur stepped forward, ready to defend Rhaegar. Aerys fumbled at his belt, revealing a small flask with a wild green sheen, wildfire. He cackled. I'll burn you all. Burn you and the city. Let it all turn to ash. I am the king. It happened quickly. Aerys rose from the throne in a stumbling lunge, uncorking the flask, intending to fling its contents across the floor near the braziers. But Jaime Lannister sprang up the steps, seizing Aerys's arm. The contents of the flask spilled upon Aerys's robe instead. Aerys screamed, flailing, and Jaime wrested the glass from his grip. Barristan dashed forward to extinguish the small patches of green flame sparking along the carpet. Rhaegar bounded up the steps, sword in hand, even as Aerys lashed out with his other hand. With an echoing shriek, the Mad King clawed at Jaime's face. Jaime recoiled but held firm. Rhaegar rushed to help, but Aerys tore free, raising a dagger from within his robe. There was a frozen moment where father and son locked eyes. Then Aerys lunged wildly. Rhaegar parried, deflecting the dagger, but Aerys came on, shrieking incoherently. Rhaegar had not wanted this end. He tried to disarm him, but the king fought with the strength of the deranged. One slash parted Rhaegar's cheek. Fire exploded in his mind. Finally, with a final surge, Rhaegar twisted Aerys's arm, forcing him to drop the dagger. In the same motion, Rhaegar's sword, all momentum behind it, pressed against the Mad King's chest. Aerys gasped, face contorted. A heartbeat later, Rhaegar shoved him backward. The king stumbled, feet catching in his singed robe, and pitched forward, impaling himself upon the Iron Throne's barbed edges. With a sickening squelch, the jagged metal pierced Aerys's back, hooking him like a piece of meat. Rhaegar stood transfixed. Aerys coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. His arms flailed, trying to free himself from the barbs, but in moments his struggle ceased. One last rattling breath and the Mad King's head lolled. Blood trickled down the melted swords, dripping onto the floor. Silence expanded, thick as the darkness that had enveloped House Targaryen for so long. Jaime, still breathing heavily, stepped back, eyes wide. Barristan and Arthur arrived on the dais, stunned at the sight. Rhaegar moved woodenly, placing a hand on his father's chest. The man was gone. Part of Rhaegar wanted to weep for the father he never truly had. Another part felt only numb relief. The war was done. The madness was done. Time passed in a blur of urgent commands, the removal of bodies, the extinguishing of hidden caches of wildfire. Rhaegar ordered the city sealed until they confirmed no more plots threatened innocent lives. He sent riders to quell any pockets of rebellion. He sat an emergency council in the Red Keep's smaller audience chamber where lords and ladies were summoned to hear the news. Aerys Targaryen was dead, and Crown Prince Rhaegar now assumed the throne as Rhaegar of the House Targaryen, second of his name. He would not style himself the second of Aerys, but rather take his own regnal name or simply be called King Rhaegar, the first of his name. He refused to seat himself upon the Iron Throne at first. He wanted it cleaned of his father's blood and perhaps needed time to reconcile that seed of twisted swords with the new era he hoped to usher in. So, in a simple chair, flanked by loyal King's Guard, he received the kneeling obeisance of the city's officials. He felt a hollowness inside, the grief for Lyanna, for the father he had lost to madness. Nonetheless, a flicker of determination lit in his soul. He would be the king that ended the Targaryen legacy of cruelty. He would strive for justice and peace. But the realm was far from stable. The rebel cause was broken but not entirely extinguished. Eddard Stark still commanded men in the north, outraged by Lyanna's death. Stannis Baratheon remained in Storm's End under siege, loyal to his brother's memory. Jon Arryn and Hoster Tully weighed their alliances carefully. Tywin Lannister still had not declared for or against. Rhaegar summoned his best advisors to form a plan, men like Barristan, Varys the Spymaster, and Prince Doran Martell of Dorne, who soon arrived in King's Landing, alarmed at the news of Aerys's death and curious about Rhaegar's intentions for the future. Peace is our only hope, Rhaegar told them one evening as they gathered in the solar. Another war will break the realm. We must offer reconciliation and security, not vengeance. Doran Martell, still mourning the wrongs done to his sister Elia, though Rhaegar had tried to treat her with kindness. The realm's rumors had placed Elia in humiliation when Rhaegar crowned Lyanna queen of love and beauty, folded his hands. What of your new child, your grace? His place in the succession. Rhaegar's expression flickered, remembering the tiny infant. He is my son by Lyanna Stark. Some question his legitimacy, but He paused. He could not explain the prophecy to these men, not without sounding like his father. He is a Targaryen. I would have him acknowledged. But first, I must secure the future of all my children. Indeed, Rhaegar's 2 children by Elia, Rhaenys and Aegon, remained precious to him, though the question of Elia's feelings after the scandal was another matter. The lords nodded. Discussion turned to Eddard Stark and how to bring him into the fold. He must be shown that you are no monster, Barristan said carefully. He loved his sister, but she chose you, did she not? Rhaegar gave a heavy sigh. She did, though few will believe it. If Eddard marches south, I will meet him as a brother, not as an enemy. He thought of sending an envoy, perhaps Arthur Dayne, who was honorable and beloved by many, to treat with Ned Stark. In the end, they agreed. Rhaegar would propose a great council to formalize a new compact, promising the North semi-autonomy in certain matters, offering justice for any slights, and ensuring that Ned Stark's presence at court would be met with the highest courtesy. Meanwhile, Rhaegar's men would lift the siege of Storm's End, offering Stannis terms that recognized him as rightful lord of the Stormlands if he would swear fealty to King Rhaegar. As for Jon Arryn, Rhaegar planned to betroth his young daughter, Princess Rhaenys, to the Vale, thereby forging a bond that would help keep the peace. The Tullus of Riverrun could be brought into alliance through a restoration of titles and positions, ensuring they lost none of their influence. Thus began a season of delicate negotiations of ravens bearing letters of the new king's good intentions. Some lords accepted, some hesitated. Tywin Lannister arrived at King's Landing in splendid array as if to overshadow the new king's retinue. Rhaegar greeted him carefully, mindful of the old lion's pride. Tywin looked upon the battered capital with a calculating gaze. Your Grace, Tywin said, bowing just enough to fulfill courtesy. We grieve the late king. May the realm flourish under your rule. Rhaegar read the emptiness in Tywin's eyes. The man bore no love for Aerys, who had once shamed him publicly. Tywin wanted power. Lord Tywin, said Rhaegar, the realm needs stability. Will you help me bring it about? Your counsel and that of your house is valued. Tywin inclined his head, a ghost of a smile at his lips. I stand ready to serve as I always have. Perhaps you will see fit to name me hand again, your grace. Rhaegar had expected this. We shall discuss it, he replied politely, not willing to promise so quickly. He was wary of giving Tywin too much power. Within a few moons, Eddard Stark did march south without a grand army but with a small retinue of northern lords seeking answers. The day he rode into the city was overcast, a sky of shifting gray clouds that threatened rain. Rhaegar stood outside the Red Keep to greet him, wearing a black doublet embroidered with the 3-headed dragon in silver thread. He had ordered the city's people to line the streets with no show of violence. When Ned Stark appeared at the gate, Rhaegar saw a gaunt, serious young man with grief etched into his features. Their eyes met. Rhaegar noted the shadow that crossed Ned's face upon beholding the Targaryen banners, the memory of what the Crown Prince had done to his sister. Ned dismounted. Rhaegar approached him, stopping a few feet away. Lord Stark, Rhaegar said, voice quiet. I grieve for your loss. Lyanna was dear to us both. Ned's jaw clenched. For a moment, Rhaegar feared the man might draw a sword. But Ned merely said, My sister died far from home. She should have been returned to Winterfell. She should have lived a quiet life with the family who loved her. Rhaegar closed his eyes briefly. I wished for her to live too. She was not imprisoned, no matter what the realm whispers. We loved each other. It brought us both joy and sorrow. I will forever carry that guilt and sorrow, that I could not save her. Ned's stare cut like ice. But something in Rhaegar's tone, or his posture, made Ned's expression soften, if only a fraction. And the child? Ned asked, voice tight. Rhaegar lifted his chin. He lives. A boy named Aemon or Jaehaerys, in the Targaryen tradition. If you wish to see him, you may. I promise you that he will know of his northern heritage. He is Stark as well as Targaryen. Rain began to patter lightly on the cobblestones as if the sky itself shed tears for Lyanna. Ned finally gave a short nod. I would see him. Then, after a pause, he added, and I will hear your terms, your grace. Rhaegar gestured for him to follow. Come, let us speak within. The negotiations that followed were not easy, but they did not erupt into violence. Ned's sense of honor, combined with his genuine love for his sister's memory, led him to accept that the new king was not his father. Rhaegar, for his part, offered the North respect for their traditions, a vow that the crown would not disregard the old ways. The child who was both Targaryen and Stark would be recognized in line of succession behind Rhaegar's older children, though the question of polygamy or annulment still hovered in the air. Rhaegar claimed that he had sought a secret annulment from Elia, though that was disputed by many. Ultimately, the realm's maesters would tie themselves in knots for years over the legality. For the sake of unity, Ned Stark agreed to bend the knee, but only if Rhaegar swore that Aemon/Jaehaerys would have the right to choose whether he identified as a Northerner or a Targaryen prince when he came of age. Rhaegar, moved by Ned's sincerity, agreed. There was an unspoken alliance forged that day, a tenuous bond between men who might have become the bitterest of enemies. With Ned Stark's submission and the formal acceptance of many other lords, the War of the Usurper ended. Peace was proclaimed across the land, though Storm's End held out until Stannis Baratheon finally received word of Robert's death and realized continuing a hopeless siege would only destroy his people. Stannis' surrender was cold and resentful, but Rhaegar kept his word, allowing Stannis to retain his lordship and station. Stannis marched home, stoic and bitter yet unpunished. Despite the realm's relief at the end of warfare, many old wounds festered. Rhaegar's coronation was a subdued affair. He was crowned in the Great September of Baelor by the High Septon, who carefully placed the ancient Targaryen crown upon Rhaegar's silver hair. The cheers in the streets rang with cautious hope, but also murmurs of doubt. So many had died, so much destruction had been wrought. The Targaryen name was tarnished by the atrocities of Aerys II. Could Rhaegar truly restore what had been lost? Yet, in the days following, the new king began to enact reforms. He replaced known corrupt officials, offered clemency to minor lords who had supported the rebellion. He established a council to oversee the rebuilding of towns ravaged by war. He sought to reduce the burden of heavy levies on small folk who had borne the brunt of conflict. Many in the populace began to speak of him as Rhaegar the Merciful. In the Red Keep, Rhaegar found himself torn between duties. He visited his children by Elia, ensuring they felt loved. Princess Elia, for her part, was guarded, uncertain how to treat the man who had humiliated her by openly favoring Lyanna Stark. She had her own pride and the support of House Martell behind her. Rhaegar did his best to express regret for any hurt caused. Elia, he told her one evening as they dined privately, I cannot change what happened. I only ask that we build a future in which our children thrive. You are queen. She set down her goblet with a delicate sigh. Yes, I am queen, she said. But the realm whispers about your other child, the one fathered on a northern girl. They whisper that I am overshadowed. Rhaegar's eyes pleaded. You must know. I never wished to cast you aside. The realm's confusion about our marriage. She held up a hand, silencing him. I know. My health prevented further children, and you believed in prophecy. Her lips twisted. I've heard the rumors that your father spoke to you of such things, that you believed destiny required a third child. All I know is that our marriage was put aside in your mind. Yet I am the mother of your heirs by law, and I must live with that or cause further strife. House Martell demands that we be shown the respect we are owed. He reached for her hand. You have my respect, my esteem. Whatever the realm thinks, your children are first in line. You shall be recognized as queen and mother to the next king. She let him take her hand, but her eyes were distant. Perhaps in time, wounds can heal, she murmured. So it was that Elia Martell remained queen, though affection between her and Rhaegar was delicate. She withdrew somewhat, focusing on her children, leaving Rhaegar to face the intricacies of governance alone. Among the realm's many intrigues, one shadow continued to loom: House Lannister. Tywin Lannister served on the small council, but Rhaegar stopped short of naming him Hand of the King, choosing instead to appoint the Honorable Jon Connington, his close friend, to that post. The old lion feigned acceptance, but behind his green eyes lurked a burning resentment. Even so, the years that followed were marked by relative peace. The old wounds from the rebellion began to mend as roads were rebuilt, trade resumed, and justice reigned more fairly than before. In an attempt to bring further unity, Rhaegar traveled across Westeros, holding court in various provinces to hear the grievances of the small folk directly. By hearing them in person, he broke the old tradition that kings remain aloof. He saw the scars left by the war. He visited the north where Ned Stark hosted him at Winterfell. There, in the Godwood, Rhaegar brought his dark-haired son, young Aemon, as he was now commonly called, and let him place his hands upon the sacred weirwood. Ned watched quietly, as if uncertain whether to be grateful or fearful that the Targaryen line would wield influence in the north forevermore. Time rolled onward. The realm's memory of Aerys' madness faded, replaced by songs celebrating how Rhaegar overcame Robert Baratheon at the Trident and ended the war. Minstrels reimagined it as a grand romance, though the heartbreak of Lyanna's death was rarely glossed over. Meanwhile, Rhaegar undertook one of the greatest tasks of his reign. He sought to systematically locate and destroy caches of wildfire hidden beneath King's Landing. Aerys had left the city a labyrinth of potential destruction. Working closely with skilled alchemists who were no longer enthralled by the Mad King's mania, Rhaegar found hundreds of jars of wildfire, some rotting or unstable. The process was slow, dangerous, and frightening, but by the end of the second year of his rule, King's Landing was nearly purged of that deadly substance. It was a triumph of diligence and a testament to Rhaegar's determination never to let madness threaten his people again. During the same period, Rhaegar worked to calm tensions with House Martell. Doran Martell was given a seat on the small council and the alliance with Dorne was reinforced. In a gesture of goodwill, Rhaegar arranged for his son Aegon to spend some time fostering in Dorne, forging deeper connections with his mother's side. Rhaenys, meanwhile, was betrothed to the young heir of the Vale, forging a strong bond with House Arryn. As for the north, the years softened the rancor between House Stark and the throne. Ned Stark spent minimal time at court, preferring the solitude of Winterfell, but he did visit occasionally, each time quietly observing Rhaegar's leadership. The northern lords appreciated that Rhaegar's taxes were lighter than Aerys's had been, and that the king maintained cordial relations rather than forcing southern customs upon them. Many began to say that the Targaryens might yet restore the golden age they had once presided over. But this was not a story free of shadows. Rhaegar's heart remained burdened by the knowledge that his father's madness might lurk in Targaryen blood, that prophecy might bind him to some unknown doom. In the black of night, he dreamt of a great darkness sweeping from the north, a cold wind carrying monstrous shapes with blue eyes. He sensed that this was the true threat, beyond petty rebellions and courtly intrigue. He conferred in secrecy with Maester Aemon Targaryen at the Wall, an aged but wise man who had once abdicated the throne. Through letters, they spoke of the ancient prophecies of the long night. Rhaegar became convinced that, one day, the realm would face a threat greater than any mortal war. To prepare for that day, he quietly strengthened the Night's Watch, sending them supplies and new recruits. He visited the Wall himself, standing atop its frozen ramparts, gazing out across the haunted forests. The wind there was razor-sharp. He felt a tremor deep in his heart. Something was out there, and the realm was not ready. Years slipped by. Rhaegar's children grew. Aegon was a handsome boy, earnest and proud. Rhaenys was clever with a lively wit. Aemon, the child of Lyanna, grew up somewhat isolated, adored by his father but viewed with suspicion by some courtiers who saw him as a living Remy. Ender of the scandal that had triggered the war. He inherited the stark gray eyes of House Stark, but his silver hair was reminiscent of the Targaryen line. He spent time in the north with his uncle Ned, learning the ways of the old gods, and also in King's Landing, learning courtly arts. His very existence bridged two worlds. Queen Elia treated Aemon politely, but never warmly. Prince Doran likewise. Some of Rhaegar's Dornish allies viewed Aemon as an interloper who might threaten Aegon's rightful place. Yet Rhaegar insisted that Aegon was his heir. Aemon, while recognized, stood behind his older siblings in the line of succession. This mollified concerns for the time being, though some lords whispered that Rhaegar might shift his favor if prophecy demanded it. Still, the realm enjoyed an era of stability. The small council functioned smoothly under Jon Connington's firm but fair administration. Lord Tywin Lannister remained wealthy and influential but was kept at arm's length. The faith re-established its trust in the crown after years of Aerys' heresy. Trade flourished, ships from Essos brought new wares, and the small folk found less reason to starve. If pockets of dissatisfaction existed on the Iron Islands, perhaps, or among certain proud northern clans, they did not openly revolt. People called it the Dragon's Peace. Yet, for Rhaegar himself, peace was not so simple. He wrestled with guilt for Lyanna's death, with sorrow that his marriage was forever marred, with dread that some future calamity loomed. Late at night, he would retreat to his solar and play the harp, letting the soft chords echo against the cold stone. On some nights, Barristan and Selmy would stand guard, hearing the music laced with longing. On others, it was Jaime Lannister who lived in an uneasy state of having once been the Kingslayer in all but deed, for the city believed it was Rhaegar who had killed Aerys in the throne room. If the truth that Aerys fell upon the throne's blades in a final moment of struggle was more complicated, only those who were there truly knew. Jaime's guilt lingered, a silent friction. When the first decade of Rhaegar's reign drew to a close, King's Landing was a changed city, cleaner, freer, and more hopeful. The Red Keep bustled with visitors from across the realm. One autumn evening, a great feast was held to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Dragon's Peace. Lords and ladies came in colorful finery. Minstrels sang, jugglers performed, wine flowed. Rhaegar took a seat at the high table next to Queen Elia and their children. At the same table sat Doran Martell, Ned Stark, who had been cajoled into attending, Jon Arryn, and a scattering of other lords. Rhaegar found himself in reflective mood. Partway through the feast, a singer was brought forth, a woman with a haunting voice. She began to sing of the events that had shaped the realm. The tragedy of Harrenhal, the war of the usurper, the duel at the Trident, the forging of the peace. Her lyrics were romanticized, describing how the Silver Prince bested the mighty stag in single combat, how the madness of the old Dragon King ended in a swirl of wildfire. When the verse reached the part about Lyanna Stark, the singer's voice took on a mournful lilt, painting a picture of star-crossed lovers parted by fate. At that line, Rhaegar felt tears prick at his eyes. He glanced at Ned Stark, who had gone very still, his gaze fixed upon the middle distance. Rhaegar quietly motioned for the singer to end that verse early. The woman complied, shifting to a more triumphant refrain about the birth of a new era. Applause rippled through the hall. Rhaegar sipped his wine to mask the turmoil in his heart. Not long after, Ned Stark excused himself from the table. Rhaegar followed. He found Ned in a quiet corridor where the flickering torches cast shadows upon the walls. "You're not enjoying the feast, my lord?" Rhaegar asked softly. Ned turned, eyes pained. "I am not much for feasts, nor for songs that dredge up old wounds." Rhaegar nodded, stepping closer. "I understand. You have borne your pain with dignity. I never wanted to wound you." A long silence. Then Ned took a breath. "If my sister truly loved you, I cannot fault her for that. But I will never stop missing her. There are days I still blame you, and there are days I see that you have done your best to atone." Rhaegar felt a pang of sorrow. "All I can do is honor her memory by ensuring the realm thrives and by cherishing our son." "Yes," Ned said quietly. "About Aemon. He comes of age soon. My bannermen whisper that you will keep him close, that you will use his northern blood to tie us to your cause forever. You must let him find his own path, else you disrespect Lyanna's memory." Rhaegar inclined his head. "He is free to choose. He is a Targaryen prince, but also half Stark." After a pause, he offered a gentle smile. "If he chooses the north, I will not stand in his way. But I suspect he feels the same pull I once did. A sense of destiny." Ned's brow furrowed. "A father's illusions, perhaps. I hope you do not saddle him with prophecy. Let him be a boy first, a man second, and a savior last of all, if at all." Rhaegar took those words to heart. They parted ways, each man returning to the feast with the weight of the past heavy on their shoulders. The realm's 10th year of peace concluded with a grand tournament held in honor of the new unity. Knights from across Westeros came to compete, among them some of the crown's best swordsmen, such as Jaime Lannister. Arthur Dayne, though aging, he still could wield dawn with formidable skill, and young up-and-comers eager to prove themselves. Rhaegar himself did not compete. He presided as king, presenting the victor's laurel. The final tilt came down to two sworn brothers of the King Guard, Jaime Lannister and Arthur Dayne. When Jaime was unhorsed by Arthur's peerless lance, the crowd roared. Rhaegar crowned Arthur as champion, awarding him a purse of gold and a ring of steel that the champion might gift to any lady he chose. That night, a hush of awe clung to the camp as Arthur Dayne knelt before the king. "Your Grace, I have served you for years. I am not a young man anymore, but I pledge my sword until my final breath." Rhaegar placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder, deeply moved. He recalled the Tower of Joy, how Arthur had safeguarded Lyanna, how he had fought for Rhaegar's cause. "I am grateful for your service, my friend. The realm owes you a debt." They exchanged a look of mutual respect. That night, Rhaegar played his harp in the royal pavilion while Arthur listened quietly outside, the notes drifting into the cool air. They both remembered the scars of the past, but also the promise of the future. Yet, in the small hours before dawn, Rhaegar awoke from a dream drenched in cold sweat. In it, he saw a dragon made of ice, roaring from beyond the wall, devouring armies with breath like shards of winter. He saw the corpse of Lyanna, crowned with frost, accusing him. He saw the realm's lords kneeling before a monstrous shape with blue eyes, and he heard a child's cry echo across endless snow. He rose, standing at the entrance of his tent, gazing toward the northern horizon. The moon was bright, the stars scattered like shards of shattered glass. He remembered the prophecy that had consumed him once, the idea that the dragon must have 3 heads, that a great war in the far future would demand a champion. He had fathered 3 children, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Aemon. Yet he feared that might not be enough. He feared the cost would be unimaginable. Still, as dawn approached, he found solace in the knowledge that, for now, the realm was at peace. He had stopped the rebellion, ended his father's tyranny, reconciled most of the great houses. The Targaryen name was slowly being rehabilitated, and small folk no longer cowered in terror at the mention of the king. Perhaps this was the best he could do to prepare the realm, to nurture his children, to keep faith in the future. Over the next years, Rhaegar continued his steady governance. He launched efforts to re-establish a stable line of succession. Aegon would inherit, trained by tutors from across the realm, forging alliances. Rhaenys, married into House Arryn, lent the crown a strong ally in the Vale. Aemon was allowed to range between King's Landing and Winterfell, forging his own identity under the watchful eyes of both the Targaryen and Stark families. In time, the realm came to accept him as the quiet Targaryen prince with Stark eyes, though rumors of his mother's kidnapping never fully ceased. Some insisted he was a bastard. Others told romantic tales of Rhaegar's undying love for Lyanna. In either case, he grew up with a measure of respect, overshadowed by neither sibling but also not thrust into the center. Meanwhile, Rhaegar sought wise counsel regarding the possibility of an eventual invasion from beyond the wall. Most lords dismissed such concerns as fables. But Rhaegar quietly supported the Night's Watch, funneling more men and resources than any king in living memory, building alliances with the wildlings who occasionally ventured south, learning their ways instead of dismissing them as savages. He corresponded with the old maester in the citadel, researching ancient texts on the long night. Some whispered that the king was haunted by the same mania as his father, but the results of his policies were beneficial. The wall was stronger, and commerce with the giftlands north of Winterfell increased. In King's Landing, the new Red Keep Library, funded by Rhaegar, collected valuable tomes on arcane knowledge, a project that garnered favor from scholars. He also restored the laws that had once protected the small folk from certain abuses by lords, earning him more goodwill. Across the 7 kingdoms, traveling bards sang of the Dragon King's mercy, praising him for abolishing crueler forms of execution favored by his father. Gone were the days of men burned alive for the slightest slight. Now, justice was administered methodically by learned judges. For many, it was a golden age compared to the horrors of the Mad King. Yet no king rules without challenge. Throughout Rhaegar's reign, subtle rivalries bubbled beneath the surface. Tywin Lannister quietly expanded his power in the west, ensuring House Lannister's wealth and might remained unmatched. Euron Greyjoy, a dangerous and cunning reaver, whispered of crow's eyes and dragon horns, though no direct threat emerged. In the Reach, House Tyrell basked in prosperity, flirting with ambitions of their own. In Dorne, the memory of Elaya's humiliation still lingered, though Rhaegar's children by Elia were half Dornish, tying the region more tightly to the crown. But the realm's greatest shift was internal. Over the course of 2 decades, people forgot the nightmares of Aerys. They saw a silver-haired king who traveled among them, who listened to their pleas, who played the harp like a wandering minstrel. They saw a queen who carried herself with dignity even if sadness lingered in her eyes. They saw a royal family that did not burn them alive, that tried to unify the houses rather than tear them apart. The Targaryen sigil no longer symbolized fear, but guarded hope. Some said Rhaegar was the last great Targaryen, the final scion who possessed both the fire of his ancestors and the compassion of a just ruler. When Rhaegar reached his 40th year, gray streaked his once silver hair. He still rode with skill, still practiced the sword, but the vigor of youth was gone. His children were growing. Aegon was near to manhood, tall and proud, a capable warrior with a penchant for strategy. Rhaenys oversaw her own small household in the Vale, beloved by her husband's family. Aemon, the Stark Targaryen child, had reached his 18th name day. He spent half the year in the north, half in the capital, forging a strange but strong bond between Winterfell and the Iron Throne. On the eve of Aemon's departure back north one winter, Rhaegar called him to the royal solar. The young prince arrived, cloaked in black and gray, a direwolf pin at his shoulder but with the Targaryen's silver hair shining in the torchlight. Rhaegar beckoned him closer to the hearth where a small fire crackled. "My son," he said gently, "you are of an age to choose your path. I have tried not to burden you with my dreams or my regrets. But I must tell you, darkness lurks beyond the wall. I do not know when or how it may come, but I sense it. I've sensed it for years." Aemon listened gravely, those stark eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. "Father, I have heard rumors. The wildlings speak of strange sightings in the far north. Even some rangers claim they've seen whites, though few believe them." Rhaegar nodded, gaze distant. "I believe them. I have studied the lore and I know the long night was real. If it comes again, the realm must stand united. Not just under one banner, but in spirit. Starks and Targaryens, lions and wolves, flowers and fish, everyone." Aemon's jaw tensed. "I will do whatever is needed." Rhaegar gave a sad smile. "You remind me of your mother. She had a fierce sense of duty and courage. Sometimes I wish she had lived to see you grow. Other times I am grateful she was spared the burdens we now bear." He set a hand on Aemon's shoulder. "Go north. Learn what you can. Keep your eyes open. One day I may need you to rally men to the cause, to protect the realm in ways we cannot yet foresee." Aemon placed his hand atop Rhaegar's. "I swear it, father. For the memory of my mother, for the honor of our house, I will not falter." They embraced. Rhaegar felt tears sting his eyes once more for the countless times since the day Lyanna died. He had done all he could to guide his children to heal the realm. Yet some things lay beyond any king's power. All he could do was hope his line and the alliances he had forged would withstand the storms to come. That night, he walked the empty corridors of the Red Keep, alone except for distant guards. He made his way to the throne room, lit by moonlight. The Iron Throne loomed, its melted swords casting jagged shadows across the floor. Rhaegar approached it slowly, hand resting lightly on the pommel of his sword. He gazed at the throne that had cost his father his life, that had nearly destroyed his house. He thought of all the times he had sat upon it, hearing petitions, signing decrees, forging peace. He had come to realize that a king was not made great by the shape of the throne he sat upon, but by the choices he made. He recalled how his father died, impaled on those twisted blades. With a measured sigh, Rhaegar placed a hand on the cold steel. "The realm needed a Targaryen to right the wrongs of the past," he murmured as if addressing the spirit of Aegon the Conqueror. "I have done my best, but I am only a man." He closed his eyes, recalling the notes of the song he had once written for Lyanna. In the hush of the throne room he hummed a quiet tune, the sound echoing against the stone. For a moment he let himself be the dreaming boy again, the prince who believed in prophecy and love and destiny. Then, with resolve, he straightened and turned away, letting the gloom swallow the Iron Throne. Outside, the city slumbered in a peace he had helped nurture. The small folk dreamt of better harvests, of dancing around maples, of raising children who would never know war. The lords of the great houses slept, satisfied for the moment with the arrangements that had given them security and prosperity. The crows roost in the rooftops, cawing softly at the waxing moon. And beyond the horizon, in the distant north, the wall loomed silent, the haunted forest whispering secrets to the wind. King Rhaegar Targaryen, called by some the last great dragon, would forever be remembered as the prince who slew the would-be usurper and guided Westeros away from the brink of ruin. He was a king of songs and prophecy, of mercy and might. If the final reckoning of the long night one day came, the realm would face it with stronger unity than before, thanks to the seeds he had sown, seeds of reconciliation, vigilance, and hope. But that is a tale for another night. For the moment, in the hush of King's Landing, under the watch of torches guttering low and moonlight filtering through high windows, Rhaegar Targaryen allowed himself a rare comfort, the knowledge that, though fate had demanded he bear great burdens, he had carried them with as much grace as any mortal king could. And the realm, after so many years of chaos, found a measure of peace in the arms of the Silver Prince who had once stood knee-deep in the Trident's waters, rubies glittering on his breastplate, and won the future with the swing of a sword and the beating of a heart. In the year that followed the quiet, moonlit vigil in the throne room, Rhaegar Targaryen pressed onward in his duty as king, ever aware of how tenuous peace could be in a land with so many proud, powerful lords. In that year's spring, he traveled with a modest retinue to Old Town, responding to an invitation from the High Septon. Though the crown had not always enjoyed cordial relations with the faith, Aerys's cruelties lingered in memory. Rhaegar believed in the importance of harmony. He arrived at the ancient city where the beacon of the high tower soared above the harbor and the sprawling citadel bristled with maesters, novices, and acolytes. The plan was to inaugurate a new wing of the citadel's library, funded in part by the crown's patronage. Rhaegar hoped these gestures would forge deeper trust so that the maesters would share knowledge of the far north and other hidden corners of the world. On a soft morning filled with the scents of rosebushes and fresh-tilled earth, Rhaegar met with the High Septon in the starry September. The building's stained-glass windows cast a kaleidoscope of color upon the polished floor. Accompanying him were Lord Jon Connington, still Hand of the King, Prince Aegon, and a few knights of the King's Guard. Arthur Dayne, Gerald Hightower's successor as Lord Commander, Barristan and Selmy, aging now but still formidable, and Jaime Lannister, whose golden hair had darkened a shade with time. They proceeded along the grand aisle, passing silent septas and novices who bowed at the king's approach. The High Septon welcomed Rhaegar warmly, offering prayers for the continued prosperity of the realm. Rhaegar, in turn, knelt to receive a blessing, mindful that the faith's acceptance of his line had helped quell suspicions of Targaryen heresy. Though many remembered Aerys's mania and the old Targaryen practice of incest, Rhaegar himself had worked to appear pious in his own measured way, bridging ancient divides. After the ceremony, the group retreated to a private antechamber behind the sept, where the High Septon, a lean, thoughtful man known for the severity of his piety, offered them wine sweetened with honey. He and Rhaegar spoke of matters of mutual concern. The crown's efforts to feed the poor, to reduce banditry along trade routes, and to strengthen ties with the faith. Eventually, the conversation meandered toward the reason Rhaegar had truly ventured south, the High Septon's rumored knowledge of certain prophecies locked within the faith's restricted archives. Rhaegar had long harbored an interest in the ancient tomes. Some said the starry September possessed volumes that predated Aegon's conquest. The High Septon nodded as Rhaegar broached the subject. "Yes, your grace," he said. "We do, indeed, keep certain records that speak of the Long Night, the White Walkers, the great doom that once threatened the living. Yet such knowledge is closely guarded. I must ask, what do you intend to do with it?" Rhaegar's face was grave, as though each word weighed heavily. "I believe we cannot forget the lessons of history. It is not my intent to sow panic in the realm. I only wish to prepare against the faintest possibility of that ancient darkness returning." He bowed his head slightly. "Surely, it is better to stand ready, even if our vigilance proves unnecessary." The High Septon studied Rhaegar's eyes. "There are many who would dismiss those old legends as fables, akin to the tales of giants or merlings. But I sense your sincerity, your grace. I have heard of your patronage to the Night's Watch. If the realm's greatest protector sees merit in caution, how can I refuse?" A moment passed in reflection. "I shall arrange for you to view the texts, though I must insist a maester and a septon accompany you in that reading. The faith does not take lightly the release of knowledge that might foster heretical superstition." Rhaegar inclined his head graciously. "I respect your caution and thank you for the trust you show me. And I promise I will not exploit the knowledge I find." Thus arrangements were made. Over the course of several days, while Lord Connington oversaw other business in Old Town, meeting with Hightowers, Tyrells, and lesser lords from the Reach, Rhaegar spent hours by candlelight in a small library annex adjacent to the starry September. There, guided by a wizened septon and a meticulous maester, he pored over ancient scrolls and tomes with cracked leather bindings. Many of these were recorded in archaic tongues that Rhaegar could only partially decipher, but the maester was adept at translation. He learned details that made his blood run cold. The old histories spoke of the White Walkers as if they were not merely men but living embodiments of ice, wielding blades that never dulled, commanding the shadows of the dead. He saw references to a pattern that every few millennia some cosmic shift allowed the others to stir. He read of the last hero, the figure who had emerged from the darkness to rally the living. Though the texts were fragmentary, Rhaegar gleaned that unity was the key. Men, the children of the forest, perhaps even the giants of old, had come together to oppose a threat that defied mortal power. In a margin note penned by some unknown scholar centuries past, Rhaegar found a cryptic phrase: "The prince that was promised shall stand against the cold darkness, forging the flame of hope in the hearts of men." This echo of the prophecy that had once consumed him felt like a warning and also a burden. He recalled how in his youth he had believed fervently that he was the prophesied prince. Then he had pinned those hopes on his children, seeking to ensure the lineage continued so that the prophecy would come to fruition. Now, as he gazed upon these old words, he knew how easily prophecy could be twisted or misread. He could not let that happen again. The realm's safety depended on pragmatism, not illusions. Still, he read on, soaking in every scrap. Certain lines suggested that only a hero armed with a sword of flame, call it Lightbringer, if the Eastern legends had any truth, could stand against the others. He read, too, that the power of dragonfire might hold them at bay. Yet Rhaegar's family no longer possessed living dragons. The last Targaryen dragons had perished generations ago, leaving only petrified eggs behind. Some claimed those eggs could never be hatched. Even if they could, the lore suggested hatching them required blood sacrifice or arcane knowledge lost in the doom of Valyria. Rhaegar's lips pressed into a thin line as he closed the final tome. No easy solutions. No quick path to forging living flame out of old bones. One night, as he emerged from that library annex, Prince Aegon found him in the corridor. Aegon was growing into a regal young man, nearly 20, with the striking black hair and violet eyes typical of certain Targaryen lines. He carried himself with an assured confidence, wearing a simple but elegant doublet in black and red. Bowing to his father, he asked quietly, "Have you found something troubling, father?" Rhaegar forced a small smile. "I have found many things. Most are incomplete, yet enough to know that if the threat in the north is real, we dare not ignore it." He paused, glancing at the young man who would one day inherit the throne. "Aegon, I want you to promise me that when you become king, you will continue to watch the Night's Watch closely. They are more than a relic of an older age." Aegon nodded without hesitation. "I have no intention of letting them dwindle. I understand your concerns. Lord Commander Mormont's reports are always thorough, and you are the one who taught me that vigilance is the greatest shield." Rhaegar's chest warmed with quiet pride. He reached out to clasp Aegon's shoulder, feeling the firm solidity of youth beneath his palm. "Good. I believe in you. And in your sisters and brother who will stand beside you." By brother, of course, he referred to Aemon, the son of Lyanna. Rhaegar knew that the realm often gossiped about the half-northern prince, but in the quiet spaces of the royal family they did not treat him as any less blood. If anything, Aegon had formed a real if sometimes reserved friendship with Aemon, shaped by the complexities of their lineage. They spoke for a time in the corridor, the torches flickering. Finally Aegon offered, "I will always honor your lessons, father. I only wish the rest of Westeros shared your caution. The High Lords are comfortable in their pleasures. How many truly believe that an ancient race of ice demons might threaten us?" Rhaegar's gaze went distant. "Very few. And perhaps I can't blame them. 2 decades of relative peace have lulled them into believing that their largest worry is the next harvest or the next trade dispute with Essos. But we must keep our eyes open. That is the responsibility we bear." In the days that followed, Rhaegar completed his business in Old Town, forging pacts with the Hightower and renewing old friendships with House Tyrell. At the Citadel, he attended a small ceremony to inaugurate the library's new wing, after which the maesters in their gray robes, jangling links of metal around their necks, recited a litany in his honor. Then, with the city's blessings, he and his retinue departed, traveling back along the Rose Road toward King's Landing. The journey took weeks. They stopped to greet local lords, to host small feasts, to hear petitions from peasants. It was the style of kingship Rhaegar had cultivated for 2 decades, a traveling presence, more open than the aloof monarchy that had preceded him. The older knights in his party sometimes found the constant halts tedious, but Rhaegar insisted it was the duty of a king to look into the eyes of the small folk, if only to remind himself of the trust placed in him. They arrived back at the capital in early summer to find that Queen Elia had received a delegation from Pentos seeking new trade agreements. After greeting his queen, Rhaegar joined her in the solar. Elia's dark eyes appraised him carefully. She still bore herself with quiet dignity, though her slender face had etched lines from years of worry. They had grown more at ease with one another over time, forging a partnership if not the passionate devotion that had once characterized Rhaegar's relationship with Lyanna. He embraced her, placing a gentle kiss upon her brow, and she offered him a small smile. "You were gone longer than anticipated," she murmured. "Aegon tells me you buried yourself in old scrolls for days on end." Rhaegar settled into a chair, drumming his fingers lightly on the carved armrest. "It was important. The knowledge we gleaned from the past might one day save us." Elia studied him, recognizing the intensity in his eyes. "I know that look. You were chasing your prophecies again." She held up a hand at his protest. "No, I am not condemning you. I only hope that this does not consume you or the realm. Remember, your father's madness was spurred by his own obsessions." Rhaegar's features tightened. "I remember far too well. But I am not Ares. I pursue these truths to prevent the realm from stumbling blindly into danger. He exhaled, pushing aside the hint of irritation. Elia rarely pressed him, but she had a knack for identifying the raw nerves in his heart. Let us not quarrel, please. The day is too beautiful and I have no wish to mar it. Elia nodded, rising to pour him a cup of cool water infused with mint. We shall not quarrel. In fact, I have good news. Rhaenys writes from the Vale she is to have her first child within the year. She wants you to visit if your duties permit. Rhaegar found himself smiling, genuine warmth flooding him. That is indeed good news. I shall ride for the Eyrie when she is nearer her time to ensure her safety and celebrate the birth. Elia's gaze flickered with something like relief, as though she worried the old heartbreak would keep them all in constant gloom. But no, Rhaegar was capable of joy. Over these past decades, she had learned that while his heart might hold sorrow, it also had room to treasure the children he had with her and the entire realm he nurtured. She laid a hand gently on his arm. Then we shall write to her, letting her know. I'm certain it will please her. He gently clasped her hand, feeling for a moment a camaraderie that was more precious than fleeting passion. Yes, my queen. It shall please me as well. Time moved steadily forward. The capital returned to its bustling routine, the markets at the foot of the city's great hill, the smell of sweet pastries and spiced wines, the clang of smithies forging new arms. In the Red Keep, courtiers came and went with petitions, offers, intrigues. Lord Tywin Lannister paid a visit, accompanied by his son Tyrion, a dwarf with a keen mind, known for a sharp tongue, reminding the king that House Lannister remained wealthy and influential in the West. Rhaegar managed these visits with tact, conscious of how Tywin could loom as a potential rival if ever the realm faltered. But for now, the old lion was content to keep his seat at Casterly Rock, gathering gold and playing courtly games, never crossing a line. The Greyjoys of the Iron Islands also sent an envoy, hinting at expansions of their trade fleets. A rumor circled that Euron Greyjoy, the exiled brother of Lord Baelon, had once found a magical horn said to control dragons. Most lords laughed at such nonsense, but Rhaegar, haunted by his father's pride in controlling dragons, could not fully dismiss it. He listened to the Greyjoy envoy, gleaning that Euron was still at large somewhere across the seas, rumored to have turned to piracy. So far, he had not dared the coasts of Westeros, likely knowing the Royal Navy under Stannis Baratheon's watchful eye at Dragonstone might respond with lethal force. Still, seeds of unease were planted in Rhaegar's mind. The year slid from summer to autumn. Harvest fairs dotted the crownlands, and the wagons bearing produce rolled through the city gates in abundance. In the throne room, Rhaegar received more good news from all corners. Riverrun's lords reported no new bandits along the Trident waters. The Stormlands had a fine yield of barley, and the Reach was brimming with orchard fruits. It seemed the realm had never been so prosperous. And yet, in these bright days, Rhaegar's eyes still drifted north. Word arrived from his son Aemon, who had traveled again to Winterfell for the turn of the season. The letter was succinct. Father, I send you greetings. The north grows colder even as autumn has only just begun. The Stark bannermen are well, but I have heard from rangers at the wall that they lost a man on a routine patrol. He did not return. They suspect he deserted or perhaps wildlings caught him. But the man who survived claimed they saw a pale figure in the snow. He spoke of eyes like ice. I do not know if it is a fancy born of fear or something more. I will travel to the wall soon to learn more. Please give my best to Queen Elia and my siblings. I remain your loving son, Aemon Targaryen of Winterfell. Reading this letter in the privacy of his solar, Rhaegar felt that old stirring of dread. Another rumor, another ephemeral sign. He thought back to the tomes in Old Town, the talk of the White Walkers as an ever-lurking threat, half forgotten by southern minds. Could it be nothing more than frightened men and chance illusions? Or were the others truly stirring beyond the frost-laden forest? Rhaegar pressed a palm to his temple, feeling the press of an oncoming headache. He did not want to believe that the realm's golden peace might shatter on the point of such a chilling menace. Yet to ignore the possibility was to repeat the mistakes of the arrogant and the heedless. He set the letter aside and resolved to confide in Jon Connington and Lord Commander Dane. Word also came that Rhaenys' pregnancy was proceeding well. The Eyrie was a place of high altitude and crisp air, but the maester there was skilled and confident in her care. That news soothed Rhaegar's heart, a reminder that life went on, that new Targaryen scions and Arryn heirs would tie the houses together more tightly. He also learned that Aegon had begun a friendship with Willis Tyrell, the heir to Highgarden. The two corresponded about horses, hawking, and the management of large estates. Elia quietly voiced her hope that the crown might formalize alliances with the Tyrells in the future. Already, Aegon was betrothed in principle to a daughter of House Martell, forging a deeper connection to Dorne. The web of alliances strengthened by the day. One crisp morning, as golden sunlight spilled across the practice yard, Rhaegar decided to drill with his King's Guard. At his age, he was hardly the unstoppable swordsman he had been in his youth, yet he maintained a daily regimen to stay sharp. Armed with a blunted longsword, he faced Barristan and Selmy in a friendly spar. The old knight bowed, snow-white hair glinting. They launched into a slow, formal dance of steel, each reading the other's moves. In the corners of the yard, young pages carried water and observed with wide eyes, for it was not every day they saw the king himself cross swords with the legendary Barristan and the Bold. Rhaegar blocked a thrust, pivoted, and feigned an overhand slash that Barristan deftly parried. The ring of metal on metal echoed. Rhaegar nearly lost his footing but adjusted in time to avoid a telling blow. Even as they continued the dance, sweat beading on their foreheads, Rhaegar found his mind drifting. He recalled the clash at the Trident so long ago, how Robert Baratheon's warhammer nearly crushed him. That day had determined the fate of the realm in one savage duel. By the grace of the gods or the subtle weave of prophecy, Rhaegar had won. Sometimes he wondered if the realm might have been better off in simpler hands, not burdened by ghosts and prophecy. But it was too late for that. He was king and the realm's destiny was tied up with his. They concluded the spar, exchanging salutes. Sir Arthur Dane, who had been observing with measured eyes, offered the king a towel. Rhaegar accepted it gratefully, wiping sweat from his brow. Arthur said softly, "You move well, your grace, though I see a certain tension in your left side. Are you pained?" Rhaegar managed a half-smile. "I'm aging, Arthur, that's all. My bones do not bend as they once did. But I thank you for your concern." Barristan, breathing heavily but still upright, gave a short chuckle. "If this is what age looks like, your grace, then the rest of us have no hope." They all shared a bit of warm camaraderie. Jaime Lannister, leaning against a post, tossed back his golden hair and smirked. "Perhaps next time, we'll let one of the younger knights try his hand. It's no fun for you to keep besting old men." Rhaegar arched a brow in amusement. "You call yourself old, Jaime? I suspect you have at least a decade before your prime begins to dim." The circle of men parted, each returning to his duties. Rhaegar stepped from the yard, heading for the royal apartments to bathe and dress. That moment of swordplay gave him a small surge of energy, yet the worries of kingship soon pressed back into his mind. A part of him missed the days when a sword in hand was the only solution needed. Now, the realm's fate depended on delicate negotiations, alliances, and vigilance that spanned years. Still, he reminded himself that these burdens had been easier to bear than the alternative, letting chaos reign. In the latter part of autumn, as the leaves turned copper and fell from the city's sparse trees, a swirl of tension arose in the west. Rhaegar received a raven from Casterly Rock. Lord Tywin alerted him that there had been several raids on Lannister lands by ships flying no known banner. Men were found slaughtered, villages burned near the shore. Tywin suspected Iron-born reavers, though it could also have been pirates from the Stepstones. Rhaegar frowned over the letter. If the raids continued, the West might be provoked to muster arms and it could spiral into a wider conflict. The king sent letters of inquiry to Lord Balon Greyjoy, who solemnly swore it was not the doing of the Iron Islands. That left the possibility of rogue elements, perhaps Euron Greyjoy, if the rumors of his piratical exploits were true. Unsure how best to proceed, Rhaegar held a small council session. Lord Connington recommended dispatching a royal fleet to patrol the western coasts, cooperating with Lannisport's ships to deter further attacks. Rhaegar concurred and sent a message to Dragonstone for Stannis Baratheon. Though Stannis had never been overly warm toward the crown after Robert's death, Rhaegar respected the man's skill at sea and his sense of duty. Stannis responded promptly, setting sail with a squadron of war galleys to the western waters. The realm had not needed a large-scale naval operation in many years, but if the threat was real, it was better to show force. In the days that followed, sporadic reports trickled back. The raiders vanished as soon as a real threat appeared. No conclusive evidence tied them to the Ironborn, though it remained the prime suspicion. Tywin Lannister, chafing at the notion of foreign raiders attacking his domains with impunity, quietly pressed Rhaegar to act more aggressively. But the king tempered his response. He did not want to push House Greyjoy into open rebellion if it wasn't truly behind the raids. A short, fractious hush settled over the matter, with Tywin simmering in frustration. Rhaegar could sense that the proud lion of Casterly Rock disliked how Rhaegar's caution might appear as weakness. Yet Rhaegar believed in measured steps. He had no interest in plunging the realm into a needless war, especially on the basis of rumors. Such tensions kept the court busy, overshadowing the approach of winter. Far to the north, Aemon continued sending letters. He wrote of how the Night's Watch was uneasy, that a few more rangers had gone missing beyond the wall, though some reappeared days later with frostbite and wild tales. The wildlings themselves seemed unsettled, with rumors that a new king beyond the wall might be stirring them to unify. Rhaegar read each letter carefully. If Mance Rayder, the rumored king beyond the wall, was rallying the free folk, the realm could see a surge of wildlings crossing into the gift. Typically, the northern lords had little patience for such migrations, but Rhaegar wondered if they could avoid bloodshed by forging some compromise. A flurry of new negotiations with Ned Stark seemed prudent. The final harvest of the year arrived, and with it came an extraordinary bounty in the Reach, fueling yet more talk of Westeros's prosperity. Rhaegar took comfort that even if trouble brewed in the north or west, at least the realm's breadbasket was strong. He personally welcomed the wagons of grain that came pouring into King's Landing, ensuring the crown's granaries were well stocked. Perhaps the realm would be well prepared if the winter turned harsh. But there was another advantage to an abundant harvest. The people in the streets felt satisfied. Fewer starving bellies meant fewer riots, fewer voices calling for the king's head if something went amiss. Rhaegar was grateful for such respite. Then came a day in late autumn when Rhaegar was in the Maester's tower reviewing ledger books that recorded shipments to the royal fleet when the steward entered with wide eyes. "Your Grace," the man said, half-bowing. "News from the Vale. Princess Rhaenys has gone into labor early and the Maester there is concerned." Rhaegar's heart lurched. He had intended to ride for the Vale in a few weeks, anticipating the birth near the turn of the new year. But if she was in labor now, it could be more difficult. In an instant, he set the ledgers aside and summoned a small party. The Eyrie was a journey that would take many days by horse and then up the winding trail, but he would go. He could not abandon his daughter, his firstborn, in her moment of need. Queen Elia, learning of this, offered to accompany him, but the roads would be cold and treacherous and she was no longer in the best health. He insisted she remain behind for her comfort. Aegon also offered to ride, but Rhaegar thought it best that at least one member of the royal family stay in King's Landing. Instead, he invited Arthur Dayne and Barristan Selmy along with a few trusted guards and maesters. They departed at first light the following morning, the sky the color of pale lead. As they rode north toward the Vale, Rhaegar felt an unsettling sense of déjà vu, recalling how many times he had rushed across the land in search of someone dear, Lyanna, years ago in that doomed tower. But Rhaenys was not doomed, he told himself. She was young, healthy, and the Vale's maester was skilled. Still, his heart quickened with each mile, the swirl of worry creeping into the corners of his mind. The air grew colder as they ascended the high roads winding into the mountains of the moon. The pines stood tall and silent, dusted with early snows. Along the way, they found small folk who recognized the Targaryen banners and greeted them with awe and respect. At times, Rhaegar heard them say, "Long live King Rhaegar, the wise dragon," or "The gods bless our good king." And each time he offered a nod or a quick word of thanks, though a part of him thought, if only you knew how fraught each day can be. At last, after days of hard travel, they reached the Gates of the Moon, the fortress at the base of the pass leading up to the Eyrie. There they learned that Rhaenys had given birth 2 days prior to their arrival. A girl, small but breathing. The labor had been complicated, with Rhaenys having fallen gravely ill during the process. By the time the king's party arrived at the Eyrie's lofty perch, the baby was stable, but Rhaenys lay pale and feverish in her bedchamber. Maester Coleman, fretful as always, explained that she was fighting an infection. Rhaegar entered her room quietly. A brazier burned to keep the cold at bay, but the night air still felt thin and biting. Rhaenys, propped up by pillows, opened her dark eyes at the sight of her father. She managed a small smile. "You came," she rasped, her voice weak. "Of course I did," he said softly, seating himself at her bedside. He gently took her hand, noticing how clammy it felt. She was a woman grown, yet in that moment, he saw the little girl who once clung to his legs, eager for stories. "I came as soon as I heard. How do you feel?" She swallowed. "Tired. It hurts to breathe sometimes. But the maester gave me potions. He says I just need rest and time." She coughed lightly, then added, "My daughter." I named her Alice, after the old Arryn tradition. She is perfect. His heart squeezed at how frail Rhaenys seemed. Yet her eyes lit with maternal pride when she spoke of her baby. She is perfect indeed, he said. May I see her? At Rhaenys's nod, he went to the cradle near the hearth. The infant lay there, wrapped in soft blankets, small fists curled. Her hair was black, her skin pale. She stirred but did not cry at his presence. Quietly, Rhaegar marveled at his granddaughter, the child of House Arryn and House Targaryen, another link weaving the realm's noble lines together. He touched the baby's tiny hand, which curled reflexively around his finger. You have done well, my darling, he said gently to Rhaenys. I'll stay until you recover your strength. Rhaenys' expression softened. Thank you. It seems so long since you carried me in your arms, but seeing you here, it helps me remember I'm never truly alone. She drifted off in a light doze aided by the maester's poppy milk. Rhaegar adjusted her covers, then met Arthur Dayne's concerned gaze. The Kingsguard knight stood at the threshold, arms folded, watching with fatherly worry. Arthur had once guarded Rhaenys when she was a toddler. In those days, the threat of rebellion was real and Elaya's children had needed constant protection. How far they had come from those days, Rhaegar thought. And yet danger still lingered in other corners. The following week was tense but hopeful. Rhaenys' fever receded bit by bit and color returned to her cheeks. She was able to nurse baby Alice, further strengthening her bond. Rhaegar spent much of his time at her bedside reading from a tome of chivalric legends or softly playing his harp when her head ached less. The Vale was entering a colder spell, so the fire never went out in Rhaenys' chambers. Her husband, an Arryn cousin who had inherited the Eyrie after the death of Lord John Arryn years earlier, hovered anxiously, grateful for the king's presence. To pass the time, Rhaegar also climbed to the airy balconies of the castle, gazing down at the swirling mists below. The Eyrie was perched like an eagle's nest atop a sheer peak. The wind brought him the scent of pine and ice. On one such day, when Rhaenys was well enough to sleep without the poppy milk, Rhaegar lingered on a walkway with Barrist and Selmy. The older knight wore a thick cloak against the chill, arms clasped behind his back as they surveyed the dizzying drop. She grows stronger, Barrist and said optimistically, nodding toward the tower where Rhaenys resided. The queen will be pleased to hear it. Rhaegar exhaled a visible puff of breath into the mountain air. She will indeed. I mean to send a raven tomorrow with the news. A pause. I only wish all my children could be here to see her. Aegon in King's Landing, Aemon in the north, and Rhaenys with me here. We are seldom gathered, are we not? Duty pulls men and women in many directions, Barristan replied kindly. Yet when it matters, you come together. That is as it should be. They gazed silently upon the craggy peaks, the clouds drifting so close they seemed almost tangible. Then, from behind them, footsteps sounded. It was Maester Coleman, small and sharp-eyed, bearing a sealed parchment. Your Grace, the Maester said, bobbing his head respectfully. A raven from Winterfell has arrived for you. Marked urgent. Rhaegar's heart leapt, a flash of worry. He accepted the letter, broke the seal. In Aemon's firm but hurried script, it read, Father, I have just returned from a sortie beyond the wall, accompanying some of the Night's Watch Rangers under Lord Commander Mormont's leave. The situation is dire. We found the remnants of 2 wildling camps, each apparently struck by some unnatural force. No bodies except for a few, yet signs of slaughter were everywhere. Tracks that seemed to vanish in fresh snow as if the perpetrators had no weight. One man in our party, Ser Waymar Royce, a younger son of House Royce, disappeared in the night. We heard screams. We found him the next day, his eyes open and lifeless, no visible wounds, but the ground around him was bitterly cold even after dawn. The rangers say these are signs of the others, though the details are hazy. Father, I know how this must sound, but I saw enough to be convinced. The cold can kill a man in many ways, but this was different. There is talk that a large host of wildlings has gathered under Mance Rayder, fleeing deeper into the wilds to avoid these terrors. I fear a true threat looms. Ned Stark has granted me permission to muster men to reinforce the wall if necessary. But we need the realm's help. I beg you, send aid, or at least come north to see the truth with your own eyes. Your devoted son, Aemon. Rhaegar lowered the parchment, breath frosting in the chill. A slow dread stole over him. This was the sign he had dreaded. A corroborated incident, something beyond rumor. If the others were truly stirring, and the letter suggested as much, what was he to do? Rally the entire realm? That would risk panic and doubt. Many lords would not believe. Yet to do nothing, to dismiss Aemon's testimony, could be folly beyond imagining. Barristan, noticing Rhaegar's darkening expression, asked quietly, "Your Grace? Does the news concern the North?" Rhaegar nodded, wordlessly handing the parchment over. Barristan's eyes scanned the lines, his face growing tense. "Seven save us," he murmured. "I can scarcely believe it." Rhaegar's lips compressed. "And yet I must. My son would not lie, nor would Lord Commander Mormont. If this is real, if the others have returned." He could not bring himself to finish that thought, for it conjured images of an endless night, armies of the dead, the realm plunged into chaos beyond measure. Barristan took a steadying breath. "What do you intend to do, Your Grace?" "I intend," Rhaegar said slowly, "to go north." He closed his eyes, his mind a swirl of possibilities. "But I cannot simply vanish. My daughter still needs me here for a short time, at least until she stabilizes. Perhaps a fortnight more. Then I will set out for Winterfell. I will see for myself. If the threat is real, we must unify the realm as never before." Barristan laid a hand gently on Rhaegar's shoulder, as if to offer support. "We have faced unimaginable peril before. Rebellion, tyranny, wildfire. Yet you have guided us through. If anyone can unite the lords behind a common cause, it is you." Rhaegar's eyes flicked to the sky where the last rays of sun glanced off the mountaintops. "May the gods grant me strength," he murmured. "For if this is the long night returning, all our petty concerns will wither in its wake." He wasted no time in drafting messages. First, to Ned Stark, advising him that the king would journey north soon, urging him to prepare the lords of the north for a possible call to arms. Second, to Lord Commander Mormont, requesting a fuller account. Third, to John Connington in King's Landing, instructing him to begin quiet mobilization of the crown's resources without revealing the precise reason. Then, after conferring with Rhaenys' husband and the maester, he decided to remain in the Vale only as long as it took to ensure Rhaenys was truly out of danger. If her condition worsened, he would be forced to stay. If she improved quickly, he would depart sooner. Rhaenys, being the intuitive daughter she was, noticed her father's anxious energy. When she was well enough to speak more than a few words, she asked him what troubled him so deeply. Rhaegar hesitated, not wishing to alarm her while she was still convalescing. Finally, he confessed in a gentle tone that disturbing news had arrived from the north. She read the gravity in his face, nodded solemnly. "You must go," she whispered. "I will be fine, father. The maester says I only need time. My baby is strong. Go do what you must." He kissed her forehead, sorrow mixing with pride. "My brave girl." "Very well, but I shall give you another few days, just to be sure you are safe." She managed a faint smile. "I am safe, I promise. I have my lord husband, the Vale's knights, and now little Alice. You, on the other hand, have a realm to protect." A few days later, reassured by the maester that Rhaenys' fever had broken entirely, Rhaegar prepared to depart. He left behind Arthur Dayne and half his guard to watch over her, taking only Barristan Selmy, a handful of knights, and a small retinue of attendants. He planned to ride with all haste to Winterfell, changing horses at every major holdfast along the way. The others at the Eyrie implored him to travel more slowly, but he would hear none of it. Each passing day might matter if the others truly lurked beyond the wall. Thus began a grueling journey. They descended from the Eyrie, carefully weaving down the mountain passes, then galloped west toward the King's Road. The air turned colder each day as they pressed on through muddy roads that froze at night. Barristan, though old, never complained. He simply rode with a stoic determination, determined to shield his king from all threats. Few lords expected to see the king in such haste, so local knights scrambled to present themselves whenever he arrived at a holdfast. Rhaegar accepted their hospitality graciously but swiftly, reluctant to waste time on formalities. As they neared Winterfell, the land took on a starker beauty, bare forests, the occasional swirling snow. Once they passed Moat Cailin, the old ruin that guarded the route into the north, Rhaegar felt the crisp wind gnaw at his cheeks. Winter is coming, indeed, he thought, echoing House Stark's words. A swirl of uncertainty lay ahead. He forced himself to remain calm. Finally, they rode under the shadow of Winterfell's ancient walls. Ned Stark stood at the gates with a small retinue waiting for them. Despite the gravity of the moment, Ned greeted Rhaegar with courtesy, bowing. "Your Grace, we have prepared rooms for you. And Aemon is waiting inside. He returned from the wall just in time to meet you." Rhaegar dismounted, nodding to Ned. "Thank you, Lord Stark. I am grateful for your hospitality. Let us go inside at once. The roads have been harsh and we have much to discuss." The courtyard was quieter than usual, with stable hands gathering the horses quickly. Rhaegar recognized the silhouettes of various northern lords who had likely assembled to see what new crisis might bring the king so far from King's Landing. He scanned the crowd, spotted a tall young man with a stark gray cloak, the cloak of House Stark, pinned with a small dragon brooch. That was Aemon, now a man grown, his face carrying both the austere angles of the north and the refined Targaryen cheekbones. A faint silver glimmer threaded his dark hair. He approached swiftly, bowed. "Father," Aemon said, voice steady. Then, after a brief, formal hesitation, he stepped forward and embraced Rhaegar. "I'm glad you came." Rhaegar returned the embrace, feeling the tension in his son's frame. "I came as soon as I could. I read your letter. Tell me everything." They proceeded into the great hall of Winterfell, the heart of House Stark's ancestral seat. A large fire roared in the stone hearth, driving back the chill. Some of the assembled northern lords included Lord Manderley, Lord Umber, and Lady Meage Mormont. They gave the king respectful bows. At Ned's silent signal, they withdrew to allow the king privacy with Ned, Aemon, Barristan, and a few others of Rhaegar's retinue. From the dais near the hearth, Rhaegar saw the ancient banners of House Stark, Grey Dire Wolf on a white field, hanging next to the black and red of House Targaryen. The sight was a symbol of how far these houses had come since the days of the rebellion. Aemon spoke with quiet urgency. "I've seen enough to convince me that the others are not a myth. There are whites, corpses reanimated by some foul magic. A few rangers swear they've glimpsed tall figures with pale skin in the deep forest. Lord Commander Mormont tries to keep a cool head, but his men are frightened. Mance Rayder and his wildlings fear it even more because they're caught in the path if a real invasion occurs." Rhaegar listened, brow creased. "How many men does the Night's Watch have?" Ned answered this time. "Fewer than 3,000, if that, scattered among the 3 manned castles. Many are thieves and poachers, not skilled knights. If a serious threat emerges, they are sorely outnumbered." Rhaegar pressed a hand to his chin, thinking quickly. "We must bolster them. But how to do so without causing widespread panic? The southern lords will call it fable, the illusions of superstitious Northmen. We have perhaps half a year, maybe less, before winter sets in fully and travel becomes difficult." He looked from Ned to Aemon. "We could muster an army and march it north, but that would take time, and how many lords would balk, refusing to tear men away from their harvests and warm halls for what they see as a ghost story?" Aemon's gaze burned with conviction. "Father, we must do something. Even if only half of what I saw is real, the threat dwarfs any normal band of wildlings or petty war. The others can raise the dead. That means every fallen soldier becomes an enemy." Barristan, listening intently, spoke up. "Your Grace, perhaps a royal decree calling for volunteers to join the Night's Watch with certain incentives, gold, reduced sentences for criminals, land grants for families. It might bolster their ranks quickly." Rhaegar inclined his head. "That is one piece of the puzzle. But if the others truly come in force, a few thousand new Black Brothers may not suffice. We might need the entire realm's armies, united as one. And that is no small feat. Even if I command it, they may not answer readily." Ned's somber voice joined in. "I can speak for the North. We will muster. My bannermen trust my judgment." But for the southern lords, he hesitated. "Perhaps you can invite them to witness what lurks at the wall if you can secure proof. One true sight of an other or a white might shock them into compliance." Rhaegar sighed, remembering the torn corpses described in Aemon's letter. "Proof. Yes, I see. We must bring them undeniable proof." He paused, a heavy hush wrapping around them. "Then I will travel to the wall in person. If I can see these things with my own eyes, I may bring back evidence. Some sign or captive that the southern lords cannot refute." Aemon tensed. "It's dangerous, Father. The rangers themselves are at risk. But if you truly want to see it, I'll lead you." Ned stiffened in alarm. "Your Grace, that is a perilous mission. If something happened to you beyond the wall, the entire realm would be thrown into chaos." Rhaegar's expression hardened. Reminiscent of the day he rode out to face Robert. "If the threat is real, the realm's survival hinges on taking that risk. I cannot hide behind the Red Keep's walls. A king's duty is to do what must be done, no matter the cost." He glanced at Ned. My friend, I know you fear for me, but I fear for the entire realm if I do nothing. Ned slowly bowed his head. So be it. Winterfell shall host you as you prepare. I will send a raven to the watch, advising them of your arrival. They will make arrangements to guard you in your search for truth. Thus it was decided. Over the next few days, Rhaegar wrote dispatches back to King's Landing, telling Connington to maintain order and readiness without revealing specifics. He also wrote to Queen Elia explaining that urgent matters required him to remain in the north for a time. Through these messages, he attempted to balance caution with clarity. The more men who heard about an army of the dead, the more likely panic would erupt. Better to say that a large wildling threat demanded the king's personal attention. While finalizing plans, Rhaegar took the opportunity to speak privately with Ned Stark in the quiet of the Godswood. The Winterfell Godswood was a solemn place of ancient weirwoods, their carved faces watching with red sap tears. Frost dappled the ground, and the sky overhead was gray. Standing by the heart tree, Rhaegar reflected on how different this was from the Targaryen tradition of the Faith of the Seven. Yet he felt a sense of humility in this sacred grove. Ned, robed in a heavy fur cloak, looked at him expectantly. Rhaegar cleared his throat. Lord Stark, you and I have had our share of tensions in the past. I took your sister, though I loved her with all my heart. You might still resent me for that. Ned's face was difficult to read, the weight of years etched into his brow. I cannot deny that I've struggled with bitterness. But I have seen how you rule, how you have tried to do right by her son. Time has softened my anger. Rhaegar felt a flicker of gratitude. Thank you. I only bring it up because I wish to say, if I fall beyond the wall, if the gods decree that my life ends in the search for truth, I ask you to look after Aemon. His place in the realm will be uncertain if war breaks out. Please, be a father to him in my stead. Ned's gray eyes flickered with emotion. I will. I give you my word. The moment hung heavy, the old god's silent presence seeming to bear witness. Then, Rhaegar added, and if I survive, we will face whatever comes together. The realm will need both wolves and dragons, side by side. Ned gripped Rhaegar's forearm in a gesture of northern solidarity. It shall have us, he vowed quietly. Then they parted, the unspoken acknowledgement that they were more than mere allies, they were bound by family ties, tragedy, and hope. When all was in readiness, Rhaegar, Aemon, and a small band departed Winterfell for Castle Black. Barristan again accompanied them, though Ned urged Rhaegar to take more men. Rhaegar chose stealth and speed over a large escort, trusting that the closer they came to the wall, the less likely they would be assailed by bandits. Along the King's Road, the scenery turned increasingly desolate. The days shortened, the wind grew fierce, howling across the moors. A few nights, they lodged at lonely inns or holdfasts. The small folk there blinked in awe to see the king riding among them in plain cloak, spattered with mud. Finally, Castle Black appeared on the horizon, a long stretch of dark stone buttressed against the colossal wall. The wall itself soared 700 feet into the sky, a frozen barrier of ice that stretched from coast to coast. Rhaegar had visited once in his youth, but the sight of it still stole his breath. A shining edifice in midday sun, it was simultaneously majestic and ominous. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont came forth to greet them in the courtyard. A hulking bear of a man, with thick gray beard and piercing eyes, Mormont bowed stiffly. Your Grace. Welcome to Castle Black. We have made ready a chamber for you, though I fear it is not as grand as you are accustomed. Rhaegar dismounted, handing the reins to a stable boy. I need no grandeur, Lord Commander. I only need truth. My son has told me troubling tales. I trust you have more to share. Mormont glanced around as if wary of eavesdroppers. Better we speak in private. The men here are uneasy enough as it is. Soon, Rhaegar and his retinue joined Mormont in a small solar within the fortress. The chamber was Spartan, rough wooden walls, a single table with chairs, a brazier for heat. Rhaegar noticed a giant raven perched on a stand near the corner, black eyes glimmering. Mormont sat heavily, rubbed his eyes. We have lost more rangers than I care to count. Not all to the others, mind you, wildlings, accidents, the cold, but the sightings. I've seen things myself. The bodies of men who died in suspicious ways. The stories from the few survivors are chilling. And now Mance Raido's wildlings are massing. Some say he wants to break through the wall to escape the dead behind them. Rhaegar pressed his lips together. And you have found no way to confirm these sightings beyond the testimony of frightened men? Mormont grimaced. We had one of our own men who died and rose again. He nearly killed me in my chambers. But after we destroyed it with fire, there was little left to show. The men who saw it can attest, but men's memories can be doubted by southern lords who are comfortable by their hearths. I wish I had a body to parade before them so they could see the truth. But these abominations do not endure once you destroy them. Aemon, standing behind Rhaegar's chair, interjected, then let us go beyond the wall. We bring a strong group, see if we can capture a white or slay one of the others. Something that cannot be denied. Mormont shook his head in alarm. That is madness, boy. We cannot simply plan to entrap another. They strike when least expected, vanish like ghosts. And the king's life is too precious. Rhaegar held up a hand. We must do something, Lord Commander. If we cannot bring the realm proof, they will not unite in time. That is the harsh reality. My presence here is proof enough that I take this seriously. But what good is that if no one else does? Barristan exhaled. Your Grace, might I suggest we do not range too far. A short foray, escorted by the best rangers, hoping to find signs that can be brought back. Perhaps a captive white if we are lucky. Mormont looked torn, wrestling with his sense of duty. I cannot stop you if you demand it, but I urge caution. The lands beyond the wall are vast, and winter's teeth are closing in. Rhaegar inclined his head. Understood. Will you lend us some of your best men to guide us? Mormont grunted. Aye. Thorin Smallwood, a capable ranger, and a few others. I'll speak to them. The moment we sense real danger, I'll want you to turn back, no matter how stubborn you might be. A wry curve tugged Rhaegar's lips. Agreed, Lord Commander. Believe me, I do not seek to throw my life away. I only wish to gather something that can save countless lives. With the basic plan formed, Rhaegar tried to rest that night, but sleep eluded him. In the simple chamber provided to him, he lay on a thin mattress, listening to the wind moan outside. He thought of Elia and his children scattered across the realm. He thought of all the small folk who had never heard the faintest rumor of an other. If he failed here, if he died in the wilderness, would the realm crumble? Or would it unify in a wave of vengeance? He was not certain. Wearily, he rose, lit a candle, and picked up his harp from where it lay. Softly, so as not to wake the men in adjacent rooms, he plucked a few mournful notes. The cold air nipped at his fingers, but the music soothed his mind. He recalled the hush of the Tower of Joy, how he had held Lyanna's hand as she died. If only she were here now, he thought. She would have had the courage to face this with me. But that was wishful longing. She was gone, and he must carry on. Dawn found them preparing for the expedition. The sky was a steel gray that promised snow. A handful of sworn brothers of the Watch, led by Thorin Smallwood, readied supplies, torches, ropes, dragon-glass daggers that legend claimed could harm the others, as well as crossbows and steel swords. Rhaegar found it sobering that these men so readily risked their lives to walk into uncertain doom. But this was the vow they had taken, to guard the realms of men. The gate through the wall was a massive tunnel sealed by great iron bars. Mormont stood with them as they prepared to pass through. Good fortune, your grace, the Lord Commander said. May the gods watch over you. And if you see Mance's wildlings, be wary. They might not distinguish you from any other foe. Rhaegar nodded. We will be vigilant. Expect us back within a se'night if all goes well. With that, the bars were lifted, the old iron chain rattling. The party stepped beyond the wall into a realm of ice and snow. The difference was immediate. The wind felt sharper, the trees looked bleaker. Low gray clouds scud overhead, threatening a storm. Aemon walked at his father's side, shoulders tense beneath his fur cloak, while Barristan and a few knights maintained formation around them. Smallwood led the way, scanning the ground for tracks. For 3 days, they traveled north and west, deeper into the haunted forest. The hush at times was suffocating. No birds sang, no wildlife scurried. Occasionally, they came upon fresh prints, wildling tracks, some old, some new, but no direct sign of others or whites. On the second night, as they camped in a ring of pine trees, Thorin Smallwood told them that further on lay an abandoned wildling village where the Watch had once found bodies. Perhaps they could find some clue there. They pressed on, the forest swallowing them. The group was silent, as if the shadows demanded hush. At midday on the third day, snow began to fall, swirling around them in thick flurries. The rangers pressed forward despite the poor visibility, determined to reach the old village. Finally, they spied the remnants of huts, collapsed wooden frames half buried in drifts. A broken palisade encircled the small settlement. The place was eerily silent. Not even crows perched in the rafters. The men fanned out, checking huts. Aemon stuck close to Rhaegar, while Barristan kept a watchful eye on the perimeter. They found signs of old bloodstains, scattered bones gnawed by some scavenger. No living soul, Yet the men's breath seemed to catch in their throats, as though the air itself was malevolent. Smallwood squatted by a patch of disturbed snow, brushing it aside with a gloved hand. Something was dragged here, he muttered. Hard to say when. A body, maybe? But no footprints remain. Only a faint track. Suddenly, one of the rangers gave a soft whistle from the far side of the village. The others converged to find him standing over a partially exposed mound. It looked like a cairn hastily constructed from loose stones. The ranger used his sword to pry one stone loose, revealing a glimpse of frozen flesh beneath. The stench was faint but unmistakable. The men exchanged grim looks. Gently, they shifted more stones until part of the body was visible, a wildling woman, half-rotted. Her open mouth was contorted as though she had died screaming. The strangest detail, though, was the blackness of her hand as if it had been seared by frost. Rhaegar felt a jolt of horror. This was no ordinary death. While they stood there, a sudden gust of wind howled across the clearing. Rhaegar's cloak snapped, and he pulled it tight. He thought he saw movement among the trees beyond the broken palisade. He squinted, but the swirl of snow made it impossible to be sure. The gloom of the winter afternoon closed in. The rangers stirred restlessly, clearly uneasy. Smallwood spoke in a low voice. We shouldn't linger. Let's mark this, bring the body with us if we can. The maesters might glean something. But as he moved to drag the corpse free, the hush of the forest seemed to deepen. The men exchanged glances. Even Barristan, stoic in the face of battle, frowned, his sword hand flexing. Eamon's voice barely above a whisper, Father. Rhaegar turned, noticing what his son had seen, an indistinct shape at the edge of the trees, pale against the shadow. A figure. The king's heart pounded. He gestured for silence, slowly resting a hand on the hilt of his sword. A different kind of chill pervaded the air now. The men could sense something unnatural. The figure moved, gliding forward. The snow parted around it as though it barely touched the ground. In a hush that made Rhaegar's blood run cold, the figure came into clearer view. Tall, gaunt, skin white as frost, eyes a crystalline blue that seemed to glow in the snowy gloom. It wore some semblance of armor that shimmered like ice. Another. The stuff of legend walking before them. The men froze, hearts hammering. For a moment Rhaegar could not breathe. He heard Eamon's breath hitch, felt Barristan stiffen beside him. Tom seemed suspended. Then the other raised an arm, grasping a sword of pale material. It caught the thin daylight and refracted it in eerie prisms. The hush cracked with tension. Barristan moved on instinct, stepping in front of the king, sword drawn. A swirl of snow concealed the other briefly, then it darted with inhuman grace, slashing at the old knight. The blow struck with a clarion note. Sparks flew. Barristan reeled back, his steel blade sheared nearly in half. The men gasped. Thorin Smallwood shouted, Dragonglass. Use the Dragonglass. One of the rangers fumbled for the obsidian dagger strapped to his belt. But before he could react, the other's sword flicked out again, slicing the man's chest. He collapsed, choking on his own blood. Horror spread among them. The other was impossibly fast, graceful as a dancer in a swirl of ice. Rhaegar sprang forward. Barristan had lost his weapon, and the other was about to deliver a killing blow. The king swung his steel longsword at the creature's back, hoping to distract it. The blade connected with a ringing clash, but the steel seemed to screech as if meeting something stronger than Valyrian steel. The impact jolted Rhaegar's arms. The other turned its cold gaze upon him, silent and deadly. Rhaegar felt genuine terror. He had faced Robert Baratheon, had warred in rebellion, but never had he confronted a being so alien, so full of cold malevolence. The creature moved to strike. Aemon lunged in, brandishing a dragonglass dagger. He drove it at the other's flank. The creature spun with fluid speed, meeting Aemon's arm with a slash that tore through cloak and flesh. Aemon cried out, stumbling. Yet the dagger's tip scraped the other side, and where it touched, a small curl of frost and cracks spread across the creature's armor. The other recoiled, as though the obsidian seared it. Another ranger, braver than wise, hurled his own dragonglass knife. The aim was wild, it missed, but the distraction gave Rhaegar and Barristan a chance to retreat, dragging the wounded men with them. The other fixed them with a glare that felt colder than death. Then, abruptly, it retreated into the swirling snow, gliding back among the trees. The men panted, hearts pounding, scanning the gloom. Had it gone, or was it circling them? Smallwood cursed under his breath, crouching beside the ranger who lay bleeding out. No saving him. His eyes already glazed in death. Another man was badly injured, gasping as he clutched a wound in his side. Eamon hissed in pain but managed to keep his feet, pressing a hand to the slash on his arm. Blood seeped through his fingers. Rhaegar's mind raced. "We have to pull back," he said. "We are outmatched." That thing, he could scarcely form words. He had seen it. That alone was enough to confirm the worst fears. Smallwood nodded, wide-eyed. "Aye, we can't fight it in this storm. We must go." He looked at the body of the wildling woman. "No chance to bring that as proof. Barristan spat, we have the memory of this attack. We have the injuries. That must suffice." Rhaegar steadied himself, checking on his son. Eamon's face was pale, whether from pain or shock. But he nodded, forcing a grim smile. "We have proof enough in our flesh," he murmured. "Let's get out." They staggered away from the ruins of the village, moving as fast as they could through knee-deep drifts. The wind howled and the flurries thickened. More than once, Rhaegar thought he saw shapes flitting among the trees, but it might have been fear or illusions. The men tightened formation, brandishing their remaining dragon-glass blades, terrified the other might strike again. But no second attack came. Perhaps the creature had decided they were not worth the trouble, or perhaps it merely delighted in letting them flee in terror. They pressed on, hearts hammering, until at last the silhouette of the wall came back into view through the swirling snow. They had lost one man, 2 others were badly wounded, but the king had survived. Eamon, though pained, walked on his own. As they stumbled back into the tunnel, the men at Castle Black rushed to help, alarmed by the blood, the battered expressions, the snapped swords. Word spread like wildfire through the fortress. The king had faced an other and lived. That night, Rhaegar dictated a letter to be sent south at once to all the great lords of Westeros. It told a stark truth: the others were real and they threatened the living. He wrote that he had seen one with his own eyes, that it had slain good men. He called upon all houses to muster and send men to the wall as soon as possible, for winter was closing in and the realm could not afford complacency. He demanded unity, caution, and the forging of new alliances. The scroll was sealed with the royal sigil, then duplicated multiple times for ravens to carry. Ned Stark arrived within a day, having come upon hearing of the incident. He found Rhaegar in Castle Black's common hall, exhausted but resolute, cradling a battered harp that he had not touched since the attack. Eamon rested under a maester's care. Ned sat across from the king, quiet for a time. Then he said, "I believe you now have the proof you wanted, though at a terrible cost." Rhaegar's silver hair hung limp around his shoulders. He nodded grimly. "Yes. And I fear the cost will rise. If the others can appear so close, they may have entire hordes further north, concealed by snow and darkness. We have no real notion of their numbers." Ned exhaled. "My bannermen will answer the call. But will the lords of the south do the same? Some might. Others may still doubt. Your letter will carry weight, but I foresee skepticism." Rhaegar studied the old wooden table, scarred by decades of soldiers' meals. "Then I shall do what I must. I will remain here in the north, overseeing the defenses until the lords can see reason. A king cannot lead from afar. I have faced the foe with my own blade. I will not abandon the men who stand on the front line. Lord Stark, I ask you to join me in rallying the greatest host we can muster, from Winterfell to Storm's End." Ned gave a short, firm nod. "I will do as you command, as we must. If the realm is to survive the long night, we must be as one." Hence began the frantic mobilization. Ravens flew across the land, bearing the royal command. For many southern lords in the midst of a fruitful autumn, the claims were incredible. Rumors sprang up in taverns. Some scoffed that the king had lost his wits, that the Targaryen madness had taken him as it had Ares. Others, though, heard the oath of men who had fought at the king's side, saw the accounts of the battered survivors. Tywin Lannister hesitated, suspicious that it might be a ploy or overblown fancy, but at length even he could not dismiss the official seal of the crown or the mention of men lost. In the Stormlands, Stannis Baratheon, a hardened man, took it more seriously. He began mustering ships and men, remembering well that Rhaegar was not prone to falsehoods. House Tyrell, alarmed by the king's urgent tone, also prepared to send a contingent. Gradually, the realm stirred, uncertain but compelled by the king's own eyewitness account. Rhaegar, for his part, remained at or near the wall, working closely with Lord Commander Mormont, Ned Stark, and other northern leaders to reinforce the castles. Torches were kept blazing, the gates made stronger. The king's presence galvanized the Night's Watch. Recruitment soared after the king's letter decreed that any man who joined the watch would earn a pension for his family, a plot of land if he survived his years of service, and a royal pardon for criminals. Thousands of convicts, lesser sons, and hedge knights began streaming north. It was a motley crowd, hardly an ideal army, but with training and the guidance of experienced knights, they might stand a chance. Thus did the realm pivot from the golden peace to the threshold of a new war, a war not among men but against death itself. And all the while, the nights grew longer, the winds sharper, the first true snows drifting south. Distant villages in the north reported sightings of eerie lights in the woods of missing kinsmen. The free folk beyond the wall, thousands strong, sought a way through, some peaceful, some desperate and violent. Mance Rayder sent word that he would parley if guaranteed safe conduct, to bring his people south of the wall as refugees from the impending doom. This offered yet another dilemma, how to handle the influx of wildlings. Ned Stark counseled caution, but Rhaegar believed they needed every living soul to fight the dead. And so uneasy negotiations began. Amid these sweeping changes, weeks turned to months. The realm's lords trickled north, some leading large hosts, others sending token forces. Tywin Lannister dispatched a legion under the command of his son Jaime, perhaps to ensure the realm would not think the Lannisters shirked duty. House Tyrell sent the flower of its chivalry, knights in shining plate, uncertain if they marched to a real threat or a fool's errand. Stannis Baratheon anchored ships at Eastwatch by the sea. In the Riverlands, Edmure Tully mustered men to march with fresh supplies. From the Vale, a contingent arrived late in the year, accompanied by a half-recovered Rhaenys, determined to do her part as a princess of the blood. Dorne, slower to commit, eventually sent a smaller but no less skilled force, including Prince Doran's younger kin. The entire realm, for the first time in centuries, converged around the wall, forging a coalition of houses that had once spilled each other's blood. Still, tensions ran high. Southern knights complained bitterly of the cold, eyes wide at the looming barrier of ice. Northern lords sneered at the softness of southern visitors. Mistrust simmered. Rhaegar spent countless hours in council, urging unity, pointing to the battered rangers as living proof that this was no ruse. The severity of the winter deepened, lending credence to the warnings. At last, in the heart of the cold season, the war began in earnest. Patrols beyond the wall clashed with pockets of whites, scattering them with fire. But each skirmish revealed that more dead walked in the woods. Whispers grew that an army of the dead, commanded by the others, was amassing in the far north. The Night's Watch, supported now by thousands of armed men from across Westeros, set up watchtowers in the Gift, stockpiled dragonglass, and prayed that dragonfire might spontaneously return from legend. Rhaegar himself ventured north of the wall a second time, but this time at the head of a large expedition, determined to confront the threat before it could gather unstoppable momentum. For days, that expedition saw only silent forests and howling storms. Then, under a blood-red sunset, they came upon the remains of a wildling encampment. There were no living souls there, only the undead. A knot of wights lurched out of the tents, men and women with skin blackened by frostbite, eyes clouded with death. The watchers on horseback recoiled, some crying out in horror. But Rhaegar spurred his steed forward, determined not to cower. The wights attacked in a mindless surge. Steel alone did little, though hacking off limbs slowed them. Fire proved most effective. Torches flung onto the wights, turning them to blackened husks. Dragonglass blades likewise ended them with cracking bursts. Half a dozen men died in the melee, either torn apart by undead claws or succumbing to the terror. Rhaegar fought with a steadfastness that earned him awe, trusting the training he'd honed across decades. He struck down two wights with his sword, finishing them off by plunging a dragonglass dagger into their skulls. The men around him rallied behind the king's example. When the fighting ended, the stench of burnt flesh hung in the air. The survivors, shaken, gazed around at the carnage. Lord Tarly of the Reach murmured, "Seven save us, it's real. This is real." A young Lannister knight vomited in the snow, trembling. Rhaegar, panting, stood among the smoking remains, heart hammering. He had proven the threat to the realm's nobles in the most brutal way possible. There would be no more doubters now. But at what cost? They retreated to the wall, carrying half-frozen wounded men, each man's gaze haunted. Word spread like wildfire that the living dead could only be truly destroyed by fire or dragonglass. The southern lords vowed to send for more pitch and torches, to gather every bit of obsidian they could find from Dragonstone's volcanic beaches. In the cold gloom of the night, Rhaegar summoned a war council. Lannisters, Tyrells, Baratheons, Tullys, Martells, Arryns, Starks, and more crowded around a crude table, each reeling from the knowledge that a war unlike any other lay before them. One of the greatest obstacles was supply. The armies had marched north, but feeding them in the dead of winter posed a massive challenge. Rhaegar directed large convoys from the south to bring grain and salted meats. Lord Wyman Manderley, wealthy from White Harbor, pledged ships and stores of fish. The men knew that if the others launched a massive attack, they must stand together at the wall to repel it. Some wanted to march out and meet the threat in the open, but others cautioned that fighting the others on their own ground was suicide. The wall, for all its limitations, offered a defensive advantage. Winter deepened. The nights stretched long, and the breath of every man seemed to crystallize in the biting air. Patrols skirmished with whites more frequently. The men grew jumpy, often striking at shadows. In the gloom, some knights lit watchfires that never went out. The watchers on top of the wall reported strange lights flickering far beyond. The hush of the haunted forest felt like the quiet before a monstrous storm. Rhaegar found himself praying to every god he knew, even the old gods of the north, that they might hold the line. He took no joy in the battles to come, but he steeled himself to do what was necessary. In the darkest hour before dawn on a night of howling wind, the alarms rang out. Horn blasts echoed across Castle Black. 1 blast for rangers returning. 2 blasts for wildlings. 3 blasts. 3 blasts meant the others. Every man leapt from his bunk, grabbed his weapon, raced to the wall or to the courtyard. Rhaegar, fully dressed in anticipation of such a moment, ran alongside Barristan, heart-thumping. They reached the top of the wall via the creaking wooden lift. The cold at that height was a living thing, slicing into their lungs. From this vantage, they peered out over the moonlit wilderness. The horizon was a blur of blowing snow, but within it faint shapes moved. Many shapes. An army. Torches flickered. The men on the wall gazed in horror as the shapes drew nearer. A wave of undead thousands, if not more, shambling, stumbling, but relentless. The watchers glimpsed pale figures on the fringes, more graceful than the whites. The others. This was it, a full-scale assault. The war for the living had come. Rhaegar, forcing calm, barked orders. Men scurried to heat pitch, to ready arrows tipped in dragonglass or wrapped in oil-soaked rags. Horns blew again, summoning the allied forces. The southern lords, the northern bannermen, the watch, all scrambled to their positions. Along the top of the wall, archers lined up, breath steaming, hearts pounding. They saw the writhing mass below, undead arms reaching, blank eyes gazing up. Some carried remnants of weapons, others only the savage strength of corpses. For a moment, a hush fell across the height of the wall. Then Rhaegar shouted, "Loose!" Arrows flew, streaking like fireflies into the darkness. Where they struck whites, the undead shrieked and twitched, some collapsing into piles of limbs. More advanced, heedless of pain. The pitch rained down in burning torrents, setting dozens alight. But it was a fraction of the horde. The others themselves wove through the melee, their presence chilling the air. The first wave hammered against the wall's base, clawing at the ice, searching for cracks or tunnels. The gates were sealed, reinforced, but men stood behind them with spears of dragonglass. All night the defenders rained death down upon the dead. The stench of burning flesh permeated the air. Screams of men and shrieks of whites blended into a cacophony. At times, the swirling snow parted, revealing glimpses of slender, pale figures who seemed to direct the whites, though the others rarely came within easy range of the defenders' arrows. Rhaegar, his jaw clenched, stood behind the archers, calling out commands. Beside him, Jaime Lannister, face pale but determined, kept up a steady rhythm. Knock, draw, loose, next to men from the west. The Tyrell Knights, not used to the cold, did their best to endure. The Northmen fought with a grim resolve, their voices raised in the ancient war cries of their ancestors. On the ground level inside the wall, men braced for the possibility of a breach. Lines of armed soldiers held torches, brandishing steel and obsidian. Catapults lobbed barrels of flaming oil over the battlements. Hours passed, each moment feeling like a lifetime. The undead kept coming, though many were destroyed by fire. Just when the defenders began to hope that the attack might falter, the others made their move. In small clusters, they advanced closer, their icy swords glimmering in the flames. Where they approached the base of the wall, the cold seemed to intensify, freezing pitch in mid-run, extinguishing fires. One portion of the wall's foundation began to crack ominously as though the ice itself was being manipulated by a dark sorcery. Men rushed to reinforce that spot, but the undead hammered it with unnatural force, guided by the others. If that section collapsed, a breach could form. Rhaegar saw it happening from above. He roared, "Focus the catapults there. Bring more fire." But the catapult crews were slow to pivot, slowed by the wind and confusion. Only a few flaming barrels soared, splashing across the writhing mass of corpses. Some wights shriveled, but the others pressed on, unaffected by flame. Rhaegar's eyes widened as a section of the ice cracked, sending a chunk of the outer wall crashing down. The living men stationed behind that portion screamed as undead poured in. The line was broken. The entire fortress was now at risk. Desperation gripped Rhaegar. "Barris Tan. Aemon!" he shouted, though he wasn't sure if his son had reached the top or remained below. "We must rally the men there. Follow me." With that, he turned from the parapet and hurried down the winding steps, ignoring the pleas of men who said the king should not go to the breach. But Rhaegar had always believed a king must lead from the front in times of dire need. In the courtyard below, chaos reigned. Wights scrambled over broken ice, howling. The ring of defenders tried to hold them at bay with torches and obsidian spears. Rhaegar forced his way to the front, sword in one hand, dragonglass dagger in the other. He struck at a wight that lurched forward, half its flesh burned away. The blow severed its spine, but still it grasped at him with a rotted arm. Gritting his teeth, he drove the dragonglass into its skull. It collapsed in a hiss of unnatural vapor. All around him, men screamed, "Burn them! Burn them!" Torches were thrust into the masses, but the defenders were outnumbered. Then, from the swirling snow, another emerged, standing upon a mound of shattered ice. It gazed upon the living with an almost curious detachment. Two wights flanked it, bodies of old watchmen who must have fallen in some earlier skirmish, their black cloaks tattered. Rhaegar's heart lurched. He advanced, raising his steel sword, though he knew steel alone could not kill an other. He prayed someone nearby had an obsidian blade. Out of the corner of his eye he saw Aemon appear, cradling his wounded arm from the prior battle. He carried a dragonglass spear. Summoning courage, he hurled the spear at the other. But the creature shifted gracefully, letting the spear sail past, shattering on the ground. With startling speed it moved toward Aemon. Rhaegar lunged, trying to intercept, but the wights blocked his path. He was forced to hack through them with savage blows, each motion draining his strength. The cold burned his lungs. A flicker of movement, Barristan Selmy, battered but unbowed, hurled a torch at the other. The creature sidestepped it easily, though the flaming brand set one of the wights alight. Rhaegar pressed forward, forging a path. A swirl of snow nearly blinded him. He stumbled, righting himself in time to see the other bearing down on Aemon. The young man swung a short sword tipped with dragonglass, but the other parried with an ice sword that rang with a shriek, sending splinters of the black glass flying. Aemon staggered, defenseless. Rhaegar roared with all the fury in his heart, charging forward. He thrust his own dragonglass dagger at the other's exposed flank. The creature twisted, raising its icy sword to parry. The blade shattered Rhaegar's steel sword in an explosion of shards. But the dagger found a sliver of flesh, or what passed for flesh. A crackling hiss sounded as the dragonglass bit in. The other reeled, turning those cold, blue eyes upon Rhaegar. A wave of numbing cold swept through his arm. Frost began to form on his gauntlet. Yet he pushed deeper, forcing the dagger. With a sound like shattered glass, the other convulsed. Its form splintered, collapsing into shards of ice that dissolved into swirling snow. Rhaegar nearly fell from the sudden release of tension, his sword arm numb. For a heartbeat, the defenders around them paused, seeing the king vanquish an other. A ragged cheer went up, fueling them with new resolve. Aemon, trembling, supported Rhaegar as he steadied himself. "Father," the younger man breathed, "you did it." Rhaegar coughed, feeling the dryness in his throat. "We must keep fighting," he rasped. The undead were still pressing forward, though the effect of the other's demise caused a momentary disarray among the wights. The defenders seized that moment, driving torches and obsidian weapons into the horde. Some men lit entire oil casks ablaze, rolling them into the breach. Flames whooshed, incinerating dozens of wights. Slowly, the tide turned. The living pressed forward with ferocious unity. A second wave of reinforcements arrived from the courtyard, Lannister and Tyrell knights, side by side with Northmen and the Watch. The wights, lacking direction once the other controlling them was destroyed, seemed to falter. At last, after what felt like a night that stretched into eternity, the undead retreated or lay destroyed. The men of Westeros emerged battered, bloodied, and scorched. Smoke hung in the air, mingling with the dawn's first glimmer of light. Rhaegar, supported by Aemon and Barristan, gazed at the carnage. The base of the wall was scarred, littered with frozen corpses. Dozens of the living had fallen. But the line had held barely. As the sun rose, pale and cold over the horizon, the watchers on the wall reported that the undead horde was scattering back into the forest. Here and there, they saw glimpses of others riding pale horses, retreating. Whether this was a temporary reprieve or a sign of true withdrawal, none could say. Rhaegar, wincing from the bruises that blossomed on his body, felt a surge of relief tempered by dread. They had survived one battle, but the war was only begun. The others would strike again, perhaps in greater force. And as winter deepened, the living would find it harder to move, to bring supplies. Meanwhile, the dead felt no cold. Still, a measure of hope rose in every man's breast. They had proven that the others could be fought, whites could be destroyed, and the living could unite. Houses that once despised each other now shared the same ramparts. At dawn, a hush fell across the battered fortress. Men knelt in the snow, some praying, some weeping, some simply too numb to speak. Rhaegar, leaning on Aemon, looked up at the towering wall. A swirl of snow caught in the wind, shimmering in the pale sunlight. He thought of Lyanna. He thought of Elia and their children. He thought of the prophecy that had haunted him since youth. Perhaps this was the meaning of it. Not a single hero saving the day, but a unification of all the realm behind the cause of life. Perhaps the song of ice and fire was this very alliance, the North's cold resilience and the Targaryen line's fiery determination. Whatever the deeper truth, Rhaegar was content to know that, for now, they had held the darkness at bay. The living had a chance. As he stood there, feeling the sting of the frosty wind against his cheeks, he found Barristan at his side, sword-chipped and black with dried blood. The old knight gave a weary smile. "Your Grace, you fought as bravely as any man I've ever seen. The realm is lucky to have you." Rhaegar's expression was grave, though a flicker of warmth touched his eyes. "We are lucky to have each other. The real test lies ahead. This was but one battle. But if we keep faith, if we keep unity, perhaps we can see a new spring." Aemon, pressing a bandage to his wounded arm, said softly, "We will, Father. We will not yield to the night." Ned Stark approached, cloak stained with ash, face pale, and said, "I swear the North stands with you. And by the gods, we will see this through." Rhaegar, the last great Targaryen king, lifted his gaze to the brightening sky. "Then let us prepare for the next dawn and every dawn thereafter until the long night is ended." His voice carried, quiet but sure, across the men who had gathered near. They straightened, hearts beating in exhausted unison, witnessing a king who had once slain the stag at the Trident, seized the throne from a mad father, and ushered in 2 decades of peace. Now he stood at the edge of the world, fighting an enemy out of ancient legend. That was the man they followed, the symbol of a realm bound together against death itself. And so the war would continue, with skirmishes and alliances, with heartbreak and triumph, with songs yet unwritten. But for the moment, under that cold sky, the living had won a reprieve. The dragon banner of House Targaryen flapped beside the dire wolf of House Stark, beside the lion of Lannister, the rose of Tyrell, the son of Martell, and all the rest. Together, they braced for the next storm, believing, hoping that as long as they stood as one, no darkness could extinguish the flame of humanity. Rhaegar felt that flame in his chest, a flickering candle of resolve that refused to be snuffed out by fear or cold. In a world threatened by shadows, that flame was the realm's final, fragile bastion. And so he would guard it as king, as father, as the man who had chosen to believe that love and unity were stronger than any tide of death. He pressed a hand to his numb sword arm, still tingling with the memory of the other's cold. With a final glance at his allies, he stepped forward, beckoning them to join him in reinforcing the battered gate, in tending the wounded, in gathering the fallen. The dawn's light caught in the shards of ice, painting the snow in fleeting rainbows. In that fragile color, Rhaegar saw a promise of tomorrow. And he would see it kept.